Ever wonder how a single decision can change everything? Ava Davis had never thought about it much. She wasn't the type to imagine her life taking unexpected turns. At 37, she was a steady nurse in the small town of Maplewood, known for her calm demeanor and commitment to her patients. After her shifts, Ava liked the comfort of routine, the feeling of predictability. But that was before she pulled over to help a stranger stranded in the rain, unknowingly setting in motion a chain of events that would turn her life upside down. Please like, subscribe, and leave your opinion below in the comments. It motivates us to share more impactful stories. It was a Friday evening, and rain poured down in heavy sheets, obscuring the road as Ava drove home. Her shift at the clinic had been long and draining, and all she could think about was curling up on her couch with a cup of tea and a warm blanket. The weather seemed determined to challenge her patience, each gust of wind tossing more rain across her windshield. She hunched over the steering wheel, squinting to see the road. Through the blur, she noticed something ahead, a car parked on the shoulder with its hazard lights flashing. Despite her exhaustion, Ava's instinct as a nurse kicked in, pushing her to help. She pulled over, her tires crunching against the gravel shoulder, and stepped out into the rain. Approaching the car, she saw a woman huddled in the driver's seat, clearly distressed and looking a bit lost as she wrapped her coat tightly around herself. Ava tapped on the window, startling the woman inside, who quickly rolled down her window, relief flooding her face. "Oh, thank you. I thought no one would stop. My car just died, and my phone has no signal out here." Ava nodded, her own coat soaked through in seconds. "Let me take a look. I'm no mechanic, but I might be able to figure out what's going on. At least, I can give you a ride somewhere safer." The woman, who introduced herself as Leah, looked visibly relieved. "Thank you, Ava. I don't know how long I'd have been stuck out here without you." With a quick check, Ava realized it was a simple issue. Leah's car battery had drained completely. Pulling out her portable jumper cables, Ava hooked up the battery and soon had the car running again. Leah's gratitude was obvious as she thanked Ava repeatedly, asking if there was any way she could repay her. Ava shook her head with a gentle smile. "Really, it's nothing. Just pay it forward someday." Leah seemed to pause, looking Ava up and down as if making a mental note of something, then thanked her again before driving off into the storm. Ava thought nothing more of it, except a slight feeling of satisfaction as she returned to her own car and headed home, the warmth of her couch and tea finally within reach. 2 days passed, and Ava had nearly forgotten the rainy roadside encounter. Life at the clinic continued as usual, with its steady rhythm of patients, paperwork, and quiet moments in between. But as Monday morning dawned, something out of the ordinary awaited her. Ava was midway through treating a patient when her phone vibrated insistently in her pocket. It was her neighbor, sounding panicked. "Ava, you need to come home right now. There's a helicopter outside your house. And, well, it looks like official people waiting for you." "What?" Ava stammered, her pulse quickening. She glanced apologetically at her patient and quickly explained she'd be right back. Hurrying to her car, her mind raced with questions. Why would a helicopter be at her home? And who could possibly be waiting for her? As she sped down the familiar streets toward her house, Ava's thoughts tumbled over themselves, trying to make sense of what was happening. The rain had stopped, but her heart pounded, feeling as if she were still caught in the middle of a storm. When she reached her street, Ava was stunned by what she saw. A sleek, black helicopter, parked neatly on the lawn in front of her modest home. A small group of people in dark suits stood around the aircraft, their posture stiff and formal as they waited. One of them, a tall man with a sharp gaze, approached her as she got out of her car. "Ms. Davis?" he asked, his tone calm yet serious. "Yes, that's me," Ava replied, her voice barely steady. "We're here on behalf of someone you assisted a couple of nights ago during a storm. She wanted us to deliver something personally." He handed her an envelope with a slight bow, then stepped back, waiting for her response. Ava's fingers trembled as she opened the envelope, not knowing what to expect. Inside was a single note, written in elegant, looping handwriting. "Ava, thank you for your kindness. You may not know it, but that evening changed my life. I hope this brings some good to yours as well. Please come with us." Ava's breath caught, her mind racing through the possibilities. What could this woman, Leah, right, possibly want with her? Why would she send a helicopter? She looked at the group of people around her, trying to gauge if they were really serious. It seemed like a scene out of a movie, not her life. After a few moments of hesitation, she nodded, her curiosity outweighing her hesitation. The man who'd handed her the letter gestured to the helicopter, and Ava followed, her heart racing with a mix of nerves and excitement. As the helicopter's blades began to whir, lifting them into the sky, Ava looked down at her quiet street, realizing she was leaving behind the normal life she knew for something unknown, something entirely unexpected. The hum of the helicopter filled the air, and Ava's mind swirled with 1,000 questions. What could possibly await her? She clutched the mysterious note in her hand, reading and rereading the words as if they might offer some hint about what was to come. The sleek black helicopter glided smoothly over the town, leaving behind the familiar streets of Maplewood as they crossed over fields and forests she'd never seen from this height. Seated beside her, one of the suited men maintained a steady, watchful expression, saying little but observing her closely. Ava took in his serious demeanor, her curiosity bubbling to the surface. She couldn't resist leaning over and asking, "Do you have any idea where we're going? Or Walia sent you?" The man's gaze softened, but he shook his head. "Miss Thompson will explain everything to you once we arrive." Miss Thompson? Ava repeated the name in her mind, finding it strangely formal compared to the woman she'd met on the side of the road. She remembered Leah as a simple, grateful woman in a raincoat, shivering from the cold and visibly flustered, not someone who would send a helicopter to whisk someone away. Just who was she, really? Soon, the view below began to change. They passed over a thick grove of trees, and then, as the helicopter descended, Ava's jaw dropped at the sight emerging beneath them. A sprawling estate stretched across the landscape, its massive, elegant mansion surrounded by immaculate gardens and winding paths. The mansion itself gleamed with a kind of quiet opulence Ava had only seen in movies. The helicopter touched down on a helipad on the estate grounds, and Ava felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness as she stepped out. The suited man gestured for her to follow, guiding her along a stone pathway that led to the mansion's front entrance. As they approached, large oak doors swung open, and another figure, a woman in a tailored dress with striking features and a poised demeanor, stepped forward to greet her. "Ava," the woman said, a warm smile breaking across her face. It was Leah, or rather Miss Thompson, as the man had referred to her. Gone was the soaked, disheveled woman Ava had met in the rain. Here stood a polished, confident figure who seemed almost to command the very air around her. "Leah?" Ava asked, her voice laced with disbelief. "Leah? Or Miss Thompson?" Nodded, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "I imagine you're surprised. I didn't expect to meet someone like you that night. You stopped when no one else did. For that, I owe you a great deal." Ava shook her head, still grappling with this transformation. But why all this? Why the helicopter, the people, this mansion? Leah gestured for Ava to follow her into the grand foyer. They entered, and Ava took in the marble floors, high ceilings, and walls lined with intricate art. The place seemed both luxurious and welcoming, as though it had been curated with care and meaning. As they continued, they entered a cozy sitting room with large windows that overlooked a stunning garden. Once they were seated, Leah's expression softened as she leaned forward, clasping her hands. "Ava, I wasn't completely honest with you the night you helped me," she began, a hint of hesitation in her voice. "I'm not just someone who got stranded. My family owns this estate, and we've been fortunate in ways most people could only dream of. But that night, I was just a woman stuck in the rain, trying to clear my head." Ava nodded slowly, beginning to understand, yet her curiosity remained. "I didn't think much of it," she admitted. "Helping you was just the right thing to do." "That's exactly it," Leah said, her eyes glinting with admiration. "You didn't ask questions. You didn't expect anything in return. You didn't care who I was. You simply helped. And that, Ava, is something I don't encounter often." Ava's cheeks flushed slightly at the praise, feeling both flattered and bewildered. I suppose I just thought you might have done the same for me. Leah nodded, leaning back as she studied Ava thoughtfully. Perhaps, but in my experience, kindness like yours is rare, and it's something I believe should be rewarded. Rewarded? Ava repeated, her brow furrowing. Leah nodded, her expression turning serious. You gave me something invaluable that night. A reminder that there are still people out there who act purely out of goodwill. It inspired me to make a change in my own life, to look at things differently. I want to give you an opportunity, Ava, a chance to do something more than what you might have imagined for yourself. Ava felt her pulse quicken as she considered Leah's words. Her life had always been steady, predictable, a cycle of shifts at the clinic, bills to pay, and the occasional day off to recharge. But a small part of her had always dreamed of something more, something beyond the routine. Could this be it? What exactly are you offering? Ava asked, her voice cautious but filled with a growing sense of anticipation. Leah reached for a thick envelope on the table beside her and handed it to Ava. This is the beginning, she said, watching closely as Ava accepted it. Inside is a check, a token of my gratitude that could help make your life a little easier. And there's more. I'd like to invite you to join me here as a personal advisor and confidant. You have a way with people, Ava. A way of connecting that's rare. I could use someone like you. Ava's mind spun as she held the envelope in her hands. She hadn't even opened it yet, but the weight of what Leah was saying felt immense. An advisor? To someone as influential as Leah seemed to be? The very idea seemed surreal. I don't know what to say, Ava stammered, feeling both honored and overwhelmed. Take your time, Leah said, her voice gentle. I'm not expecting an answer right now. I just wanted you to know that the offer is real, and that it stands whenever you're ready. Ava nodded, her mind whirling with possibilities she'd never imagined for herself. She left the mansion that day with the envelope in hand, a sense of gratitude and bewilderment filling her chest. The helicopter ride back to her modest home felt like something out of a dream, yet the envelope she clutched was very real. Once she was back in her living room, Ava finally allowed herself to open the envelope. Inside, she found a check for an amount that made her breath hitch, a sum she could hardly comprehend. Alongside it was a handwritten note from Leah. Kindness is a gift, Ava. This is just the beginning. Ava sat there, the envelope on her lap, the check and the note resting in her hands. The opportunity Leah had extended was both tempting and terrifying. Her life as she knew it could change forever. But was she ready to take the leap? The silence in Ava's tiny apartment was overwhelming as she stared at the check in her hand. She couldn't keep her mind from drifting back to Leah's offer, the mansion's grandeur, and the words on that small piece of paper. Kindness is a gift, Ava. This is just the beginning. The idea of stepping into a world so far from her own was exhilarating yet intimidating. Sitting alone with her thoughts, Ava's gaze shifted to the stack of bills piled on her counter. Their unspoken demands a constant reminder of her reality. She lived within the constraints of her pay as a clinic nurse, carefully budgeting each month to ensure she'd make ends meet. And now, in her hands, was a single check that could erase those worries for years. But it wasn't just about the money. It was the idea of working alongside someone like Leah Thompson. There was something captivating about Leah's presence, her confidence, her vision, and the strange sense of destiny that Ava felt pulling her toward this opportunity. Still, doubts crept in, whispering to her that this was all too good to be true. Why would someone like Leah even want her help, much less offer her a place in her life? Ava was just a nurse from a quiet town, not the kind of person who mingled with people of influence. Unable to sleep, Ava decided to take a walk to clear her head. The city streets were quiet, save for the occasional hum of a distant car. She found herself at the park nearby, where the streetlights cast soft, comforting glows along the empty paths. She sat on a bench under a tree and gazed up at the stars, her mind still circling back to Leah's words. As she sat there, a small memory surfaced. Years ago, Ava's mother had told her something that had stuck with her. Life doesn't hand you chances every day. When one comes, you take it. Her mother had always encouraged her to be bold, to trust herself. Maybe this was one of those rare moments, a chance she could either seize or forever wonder about. The next morning, Ava found herself dialing the number Leah had left in the envelope. Her fingers trembled slightly as she waited, and after a few rings, a familiar voice answered. Hello? Leah's voice was as warm and calm as ever, even over the phone. Leah, it's Ava, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. I wanted to discuss your offer. A smile could be heard in Leah's voice. Ava, I was hoping you'd call. Would you like to come by this afternoon? Ava agreed, and hours later, she found herself standing in front of the grand doors of Leah's mansion once more. A butler greeted her this time and guided her to a different room, a bright, airy study with walls lined with books and tall windows looking out over the expansive gardens. Leah was seated at a desk, scribbling something in a notebook. She looked up when Ava entered, setting her pen down and gesturing for her to sit. I'm so glad you came, Leah said. I know this is a lot to take in. Let me answer any questions you have. Ava took a deep breath, steadying herself. It is a lot. I mean, just a few days ago, I was helping a stranger on the road, and now I'm here, considering a new life altogether. Leah nodded understandingly. I don't blame you for being cautious. If the roles were reversed, I'd probably feel the same. But Ava, what I'm offering isn't just a job. I want you to be part of something bigger. Something bigger? Ava repeated, intrigued. Yes. As you know, my family has had wealth and influence for generations, but there's more to life than material success. I've been working on projects that aim to give back, charity initiatives, social programs. I've seen firsthand how kindness, empathy, and true understanding can make an impact. And I believe you have those qualities. Ava's mind raced, wondering if she could truly make a difference. She had always cared about people and wanted to help, which was what drove her to become a nurse in the first place. But this was a different kind of helping, one that stretched far beyond the clinic walls. I'm honored, Ava said, feeling the sincerity in her words. But I'm not sure I'm the right person for this. I'm just a nurse. I don't have experience with charities or programs like that. Leah leaned forward, her gaze intent. That's exactly why I want you, Ava. You understand people. You have a way of connecting, of listening, of seeing beyond the surface. I can teach you everything else. Ava felt a mixture of excitement and fear at the prospect of such responsibility. But the image of the patients she'd helped at the clinic, the people she'd comforted in their hardest moments, filled her with a sense of purpose. Maybe Leah was right. Maybe she did have something to offer. What would I be doing exactly? She asked, wanting to know more. Leah smiled, seeming pleased by her interest. You'd start by assisting me directly, helping to organize our projects, meeting with the people we're supporting, understanding their needs. You'll learn about our initiatives and eventually manage some of them yourself. The idea of such a role was daunting, yet something inside Ava stirred with a thrill she hadn't felt in a long time. She could envision herself working on these projects, meeting people, and creating real change. She'd always dreamed of making a difference, and maybe, just maybe, this was her chance. After a long pause, Ava met Leah's gaze, determination solidifying within her. Okay, she said, a slight tremor in her voice. I'll do it. I'll take the job. Leah's face lit up with a wide smile. Ava, you have no idea how happy that makes me. Welcome to the team. They shook hands, and Ava felt a strange sense of destiny as Leah's firm grip sealed the agreement. She was officially stepping into a new chapter, one that would stretch her in ways she'd never imagined. That evening, Ava returned home feeling a blend of excitement and nerves. The quiet simplicity of her apartment seemed even more pronounced now, as if a different world awaited her beyond these walls. She found herself unable to sleep again, her mind racing with anticipation of the unknown. But this time, the uncertainty didn't feel overwhelming. It felt like a door opening, a chance to step into the life her mother had always dreamed she'd have. Ava stood in the doorway of her clinic for what she thought might be the last time. The familiar scent of antiseptic and the hum of bustling nurses filled the small building. She had taken a few days off to consider Leah's offer and to tie up loose ends here, just in case. Although her decision was made, she felt an unexpected pang of nostalgia. Ava knew she was leaving behind more than a job. This clinic had been a second home to her, a place where she'd learned to care deeply for people in their hardest moments. Her colleagues were more like family, people who had seen her on her best and worst days. But the thrill of stepping into something new outweighed her hesitations. Still, she wanted to say goodbye properly, in case things moved quickly. As she walked through the hallway, her supervisor, Dr. Eliza Grant, spotted her and called out, "Ava, heading out already?" Dr. Grant's warm smile softened her sharp features, and Ava felt a pang of guilt, knowing she hadn't yet shared her decision. "Actually, Dr. Grant, do you have a moment? I wanted to talk with you about an opportunity I'm considering," Ava said, choosing her words carefully. Dr. Grant's eyebrows lifted in curiosity. She ushered Ava into her small office, gesturing for her to sit down. "An opportunity, huh? Sounds serious. What's going on, Ava?" Ava took a deep breath and explained everything. The unexpected encounter with Leah, the check, and, finally, Leah's incredible offer. Dr. Grant listened intently, her expression a mix of surprise and admiration. When Ava finished, Dr. Grant sat back in her chair, arms crossed thoughtfully. "You know, Ava, I've always seen something in you. I could tell from the first day you started here that you were driven by something deeper than most. You have this natural gift for connecting with people. I'm not surprised someone like Leah Thompson noticed that too." Ava felt a warm flush of gratitude at Dr. Grant's words. "Thank you, Dr. Grant. I never expected anything like this. I keep wondering if it's too good to be true." Dr. Grant chuckled softly. "There's no such thing as too good, Ava. You've worked hard, and you've earned every ounce of happiness and success that comes your way. And remember, opportunities like this don't come around often. If you feel that pull, that sense of purpose, I'd say trust it." Ava nodded, her decision feeling even more certain. "I guess I'm just afraid of the unknown. This clinic, it's all I've known since I finished school." Dr. Grant leaned forward, resting a hand on Ava's. "The unknown is where growth happens. It's natural to be afraid, but it's also how we find out who we are. You'll always have a place here, but if your heart is pulling you towards something new, don't let fear hold you back." With Dr. Grant's encouragement solidifying her resolve, Ava spent the rest of the day saying her goodbyes. She shared hugs with her colleagues, promising to visit often. Her friend Jamie, a fellow nurse, even joked, "Don't forget us little people when you're mingling with the big shots." As she walked out the clinic doors that evening, a strange sense of liberation washed over her. Ava's heart raced with the thrill of possibility. This was it, the start of a new chapter. 2 days later, a sleek black car arrived to take Ava to Leah's mansion. As she stepped into the car, a feeling of surreal excitement surged within her. She looked around her neighborhood, knowing that her simple life was about to change. The drive was smooth, winding through the town and eventually leading to the outskirts, where Leah's estate waited, looming in the distance. Ava's nerves returned as the car approached the mansion, the gates opening with a silent elegance that seemed fitting for someone like Leah. When they finally reached the front entrance, Leah was there waiting for her, a warm smile on her face. She looked more relaxed than Ava had seen her before, dressed casually, without the elegant severity Ava had first associated with her. "Ava!" Leah greeted her with genuine warmth, extending a hand. "I'm so glad you decided to come." Ava shook her hand, surprised by how comforting Leah's touch felt. "I am too. Thank you, Leah. I'm excited, and a little nervous, to be honest." "That's perfectly natural," Leah replied, laughing lightly. "Let me give you a tour, and we'll go over everything in detail. I want you to feel at home here." As Leah led her through the mansion, Ava marveled at the intricate design of each room. There were grand halls adorned with paintings and sculptures, lush sitting rooms with floor-to-ceiling windows, and a library filled with shelves of books that stretched as high as the ceiling. Ava couldn't help but feel awed by the history and elegance of Leah's home. She felt like she'd stepped into another world, one far beyond her modest life. After the tour, they settled in a smaller, cozy study with dark wooden furniture and a large stone fireplace. A tray of tea and small pastries was set between them, adding a comforting warmth to the atmosphere. Leah poured tea for Ava and herself, then sat back, looking at Ava with a serious expression. Let me explain a bit more about what I have in mind for you, Ava. I'll be honest, this work isn't easy. It involves connecting with people from all walks of life and often seeing difficult situations. But I believe you have the empathy and strength needed. Ava listened intently as Leah explained her mission. She spoke of the social initiatives she'd started, programs aimed at helping underserved communities, and her desire to expand them in a way that would make a lasting impact. She wanted Ava to help build and oversee these programs, using her unique perspective as someone who'd worked directly with people in need. I can't promise it'll be smooth sailing, Leah said, looking Ava in the eyes. But if you accept, I'll provide you with the support, training, and resources you'll need. Together, I think we can make a real difference. The gravity of Leah's words filled Ava with purpose. She dreamed of doing something like this, helping people on a larger scale, creating programs that reached beyond her local clinic. Leah, she said, her voice full of sincerity, I'm honored. This is exactly the kind of work I've always wanted to do. Leah's face softened with relief and pride. Then welcome aboard, Ava. I have a feeling we're going to accomplish incredible things together. They spent the next few hours going over initial plans. Leah explained the logistics, her expectations, and Ava's role in helping manage and expand the programs. Ava took notes, feeling a growing sense of confidence in her new role. As the day came to an end, Leah escorted Ava to the car waiting to take her home. Before Ava stepped inside, Leah placed a hand on her shoulder. Ava, remember this. You're here because of who you are, not just what you can do. Don't ever forget that. Ava nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. She watched as Leah waved her off, feeling an overwhelming sense of destiny pulling her forward. As the car rolled through the quiet streets, Ava looked out at the familiar neighborhood she'd grown up in. She knew her life would never be the same. For the first time, she felt as though she truly stepped into the path her mother had always hoped she'd find. The walls of the small apartment seemed to press in tighter as Ava began organizing her things for the move. Every item she packed felt like another step into the unknown, a shift from the comfortable routine she had known to something wildly unpredictable. It was strange how quickly everything had changed. Just weeks ago, she'd been treating patients in the modest clinic, and now she was preparing to enter a world she'd only seen from afar. Ava glanced around, her gaze lingering on familiar objects. The faded photo of her parents on the shelf, a quilt her grandmother had sewn by hand, the scrappy, worn journals where she'd written her hopes and worries over the years. As excited as she was for this new journey, leaving her home and everything it represented felt bittersweet. That evening, her closest friends gathered at her apartment to bid her farewell. Jamie, her longtime friend and fellow nurse, had organized a small get-together with a few co-workers and friends. They filled the room with laughter and well wishes, each person offering words of encouragement, a reminder of how deeply Ava was loved and valued. Promise you won't forget about us, Jamie teased, holding up a glass. Here's to Ava, the only person we know brave enough to take on the world of the rich and powerful. Everyone cheered, lifting their glasses. Ava laughed, feeling a warmth that melted away some of her worries. Don't worry, I'll be back with plenty of stories, she replied. And maybe a few secrets, she added with a wink, knowing Jamie loved a good mystery. Later that night, as her friends trickled out one by one, Ava sat on the floor, staring at the half-packed boxes and the empty walls. The excitement was mingled with a hint of fear, a natural reaction to leaving everything she knew for something so unfamiliar. But she reminded herself that she was doing this not just for her own growth, but for the possibility of helping others on a larger scale. This was her chance to make a difference beyond what she could do in a single clinic. The next morning, Leah's assistant, a woman named Martha, arrived to help Ava with the final steps of the move. Martha was efficient, her polite demeanor masking a sharp mind and an unwavering dedication to her role. She explained the arrangements Leah had made, assuring Ava that she would have everything she needed once they reached the estate. As they loaded Ava's belongings into the car, Martha handed her a sleek leather-bound folder. Leah asked me to give you this, she said. It's an outline of the project goals, key contacts, and some background information. She thought you might want to familiarize yourself on the drive. Ava thanked her, taking the folder and opening it carefully. Inside was a detailed breakdown of Leah's various charitable initiatives, each one with a specific mission and set of objectives. The first program, a community health project, was focused on providing medical care and resources to underprivileged areas. Leah's vision was clear, but she had left enough room for Ava to shape the details and make them her own. As she read through the documents, Ava felt a deep sense of purpose taking root. The challenges ahead were immense, but the opportunity to bring meaningful change was exhilarating. She knew it wouldn't be easy. She'd be dealing with layers of bureaucracy, securing funding, and organizing logistics across different communities. But if she could help even one person, it would be worth it. Hours later, they arrived at the estate, where Leah was waiting to greet her with a warm smile. Ava was taken to her quarters, a cozy suite within the mansion that had been thoughtfully prepared to make her feel at home. The room was elegantly furnished, with soft lighting, warm earth tones, and personal touches that made it feel inviting. Leah joined her shortly afterward, bringing a cup of tea and sitting down with her by the window. "I know this is a lot to take in," she said, her tone gentle, "but I want you to know that you're not alone in this. Martha, myself, and everyone here are here to support you." Ava nodded, appreciating Leah's thoughtfulness. "Thank you, Leah. It's all a bit overwhelming, but I'm excited. I just want to make sure I live up to your expectations." Leah smiled, placing a reassuring hand on Ava's arm. "You already are. I've seen how you interact with people, Ava. You're genuine, and that's something I can't teach. I trust you, and so do the people you'll be working with." They spent the rest of the evening going over the initial steps for the project, discussing potential partnerships and the importance of community engagement. Ava's mind buzzed with ideas, and for the first time, she allowed herself to fully believe that she was ready for this. The next few days were a whirlwind of meetings and introductions. Leah personally introduced Ava to some key contacts, including other philanthropists, community leaders, and business owners who had supported her causes over the years. Ava quickly realized that Leah's reputation extended far beyond her wealth. People admired her not just for her resources, but for her dedication to making a difference. It was clear that Leah didn't just throw money at problems. She cared deeply, and her personal involvement inspired those around her. One afternoon, Ava accompanied Leah to a meeting with a local council to discuss a new community health center they hoped to establish in an underserved neighborhood. The council members listened intently as Leah outlined her vision, emphasizing the need for accessible medical care and preventative health education. When it was Ava's turn to speak, she felt a flash of nerves. But as she looked around the table, she remembered the faces of her former patients and the impact this center could have on people like them. Taking a steadying breath, she spoke passionately about her experiences as a nurse, sharing stories of the people she had helped and the struggles they faced. Her words seemed to resonate with the council members, who nodded in understanding. By the end of the meeting, they had secured preliminary approval for the project, with promises to expedite the necessary permits. As they left the council building, Leah beamed with pride. "You did wonderfully, Ava. You connected with them in a way I never could have. This is exactly why I wanted you on board." Ava smiled, feeling a surge of confidence. "Thank you, Leah. I'm just glad I could help. It feels right." Over the next few weeks, Ava threw herself into the work, collaborating with community leaders, doctors, and volunteers to bring Leah's projects to life. Each day presented new challenges, from negotiating contracts to navigating local politics, but Ava tackled them with a sense of determination she hadn't felt in years. She was beginning to understand the scope of Leah's ambition and the impact they could make together. One evening, after a long day of work, Ava sat in her suite, reflecting on everything that had happened. She was exhausted but fulfilled in a way that filled her with gratitude. She thought back to her modest clinic and her early days as a nurse, realizing how those experiences had prepared her for this moment. Just as she was about to call it a night, there was a soft knock at her door. Surprised, she opened it to find Martha standing there, holding a thick envelope. "Leah wanted me to deliver this to you," Martha said, handing over the envelope with a gentle smile. "It's something she felt might inspire you." Curious, Ava took the envelope and thanked Martha, closing the door behind her. She opened it carefully, finding a series of handwritten letters inside. The letters were from people Leah had helped over the years, each one expressing gratitude for the impact she'd made on their lives. Reading those letters, Ava felt tears prick her eyes. She realized that Leah's work wasn't just about projects or initiatives. It was about real people, people whose lives had been changed because someone believed in them. As she placed the letters back in the envelope, Ava's resolve deepened. She wasn't just here to manage projects. She was here to continue a legacy, to make a difference in the lives of others, just as Leah had done. Ava's confidence grew, but so did the complexity of the work she faced. In the months that followed, Ava immersed herself in every detail of the project, discovering the challenges of working in a high-stakes environment that required diplomacy, careful planning, and an unwavering sense of purpose. Leah had introduced her to more of the organization's supporters, and each day brought new faces, new partnerships, and fresh layers of expectation. One morning, Leah invited Ava to a formal luncheon held in honor of a philanthropic alliance aimed at tackling issues in healthcare, education, and housing. The event was bustling with influential people from various fields: business moguls, local government officials, social workers, and educators, all dedicated to addressing systemic issues. Ava could feel the energy in the room. This was where change could happen on a large scale. As Ava took her seat beside Leah, she noticed an older man across the table scrutinizing her. She recognized him as Benjamin Cross, a prominent businessman known for his contributions to the community, but also for his reputation as a skeptic when it came to charitable projects. "So, you're the new face Leah's brought into her inner circle," Benjamin said with a slight smirk, his tone teetering between curiosity and judgment. "Leah speaks highly of you. But tell me, what makes you think you can actually make a difference?" The question caught her off guard. She knew Benjamin's type: pragmatic, focused on results, and less concerned with sentimentality. Ava took a steadying breath and decided to respond honestly. "I'm here because I believe that change happens one person at a time," Ava said, meeting his gaze. "I've worked with people who've had nothing, people who couldn't afford basic medical care or education. I believe that with the right resources, we can help empower communities to stand on their own. I may not have the experience of everyone in this room, but I have the passion and the commitment to make a difference." Benjamin's expression softened slightly, but he continued to challenge her. "Passion is good, but passion alone doesn't solve real problems. We need strategy, a clear approach, and measurable impact." Ava nodded. "I agree completely. That's why I'm working closely with Leah and the local leaders to create sustainable, long-term solutions. We're not here to offer Band-Aid fixes. We want to build something that will last." Leah watched the exchange, a hint of pride in her eyes. When the luncheon concluded, she patted Ava on the shoulder. "You handled that well. Benjamin's a tough one to win over, but he respects people who stand their ground. I think you made an impression." Ava let out a breath, feeling both relieved and more determined than ever. Leah's trust was one thing, but earning the respect of others in the industry felt like an important step forward. The luncheon marked a turning point. Ava began receiving invitations to speak at various events, where she shared her story and the impact of Leah's initiatives. She was becoming a voice in her own right, advocating for underserved communities and drawing attention to the importance of accessible healthcare and education. But with the increased responsibility came heightened pressure. One of the main projects she was overseeing, a health outreach initiative in a low-income neighborhood, was facing logistical setbacks. The clinic they planned to open was met with resistance from some local residents who feared it would increase traffic and disrupt their community. Determined to find a solution, Ava organized a community meeting, inviting residents to voice their concerns. The atmosphere was tense at first, with people expressing frustrations and fears about the potential changes. Some accused the project of being a publicity stunt, while others argued it would only benefit those who didn't live in the area. Ava listened patiently, acknowledging their concerns. When it was her turn to speak, she addressed each issue thoughtfully, explaining the steps they planned to take to minimize disruptions and how the clinic could benefit not just those in need but the entire neighborhood. Her sincerity gradually softened the room, and by the end of the meeting, a few residents had even volunteered to help spread the word. As the crowd dispersed, an elderly woman approached Ava. I wasn't sure about you at first, she admitted. But you listened. That means something. Thank you. Ava smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment. Thank you for giving me the chance to listen. We're in this together. The following weeks were filled with a flurry of activity. The outreach project moved forward, with Ava meeting regularly with community leaders, doctors, and volunteers to ensure the clinic would meet the residents' needs. She was learning to navigate the delicate balance between advocacy and practicality, between ambitious vision and careful planning. Then, one evening, just as things seemed to be settling into a routine, she received a call from an unknown number. Curious, she answered, only to hear the voice of Benjamin Cross on the other end. Miss Parker, he began, his tone formal but measured. I'll be brief. I'm impressed with the work you're doing. Your dedication is evident, and I think you have the potential to go far. I'd like to propose a partnership, a chance for you to take this project to a broader level. Ava was taken aback. This was the last thing she'd expected from him, especially after their initial encounter. I'm honored, Mr. Cross. What kind of partnership do you have in mind? We'd be pooling resources to expand these clinics statewide, he explained. But I need someone I can trust, someone who isn't just in it for the glory. If you're interested, let's meet and discuss the details. Ava's mind raced. The opportunity to expand Leah's vision and reach more people was incredible, but she couldn't ignore the complexities that came with partnering with someone as influential as Benjamin. There were bound to be strings attached, expectations she hadn't anticipated. She agreed to meet him, feeling a mix of excitement and trepidation. After discussing it with Leah, who fully supported the idea, Ava began preparing for her meeting with Benjamin. She knew she'd need to be prepared, both to negotiate and to protect the integrity of Leah's mission. When the day of the meeting arrived, Benjamin wasted no time in outlining his proposal. He wanted to help fund the clinic expansions and was prepared to invest heavily, but in return, he wanted a say in how the clinics operated, focusing on efficiency and measurable impact. I understand your passion, Ava, he said, studying her. But passion without results is wasted effort. I want to make sure these clinics aren't just another feel-good project, but that they're producing real outcomes. Ava considered his words carefully. She knew he had a point, but she also knew the people they aimed to serve weren't numbers or statistics. I agree that results are important, she replied, meeting his gaze. But we can't lose sight of the human aspect. These clinics will be more than just places for treatment. They'll be places of trust and community. I believe we can have both, efficiency and empathy. Benjamin regarded her thoughtfully, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of respect in his eyes. You're different, Ava. You don't back down easily. I like that. After hours of negotiations, they finally reached an agreement. Benjamin would provide funding and logistical support, but Ava would retain control over how the clinics operated on the ground level. It was a delicate balance, but Ava felt it was a step toward achieving something truly transformative. As she left the meeting, Ava couldn't help but feel both exhilarated and daunted. The project had grown beyond what she'd imagined, and with Benjamin's support, they had the resources to make a significant impact. But she was also keenly aware that the stakes had never been higher, and any misstep could put everything at risk. Back at the estate, she shared the news with Leah, who embraced her warmly. This is only the beginning, Ava, Leah said, her eyes shining with pride. Together, we're building something that can outlast us both. That night, Ava sat in her suite, reflecting on the journey so far. She was no longer the nurse who had hesitated to leave her small clinic. She was becoming a leader, someone who could take Leah's vision and carry it forward, shaping it in ways she never would have dreamed. The partnership with Benjamin Cross changed everything, both for better and for worse. The initial stages of the expanded outreach project launched with unprecedented momentum. With Benjamin's funding and influence, Ava was able to hire a dedicated team of medical professionals, community organizers, and volunteers. Clinics began opening in towns where basic health care had previously been inaccessible, and their impact was immediately visible. Ava found herself balancing a demanding schedule that kept her constantly on the road, meeting with local leaders, assessing each clinic's progress, and training staff members. Each site came with its own challenges. Some required more funding, others faced community hesitations, and there were always logistical hurdles. But Ava's determination kept her focused, and the clinics began to represent a beacon of hope for countless families in need. One day, during a check-in at a newly established clinic in Brighton, a town known for its economic challenges, Ava was approached by a young mother holding a toddler on her hip. The woman, eyes weary yet kind, introduced herself as Sarah. "I don't know if you realize just how much this place means to us," Sarah said, her voice filled with gratitude. "My son has asthma, and I couldn't afford the inhalers. But now, thanks to your clinic, he's able to breathe again." Ava was moved. These were the moments that reminded her why the work was worth every sleepless night and every challenge. She took Sarah's hand and thanked her for sharing her story, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. But with growth came tension. Benjamin's support had given Ava's project wings, yet his constant focus on numbers and efficiency was becoming a point of friction. He wanted detailed reports on each clinic's patient turnout, treatment outcomes, and cost-effectiveness. While Ava understood the importance of accountability, Benjamin's rigid approach sometimes felt at odds with her community-centered vision. One afternoon, during a quarterly review meeting, Benjamin's tone grew sharp. "We're pouring millions into these clinics, Ava, but I need to know, are we truly reaching as many people as we could? There's no room for inefficiency here." Ava took a steadying breath. "Benjamin, I understand your concerns, but real impact isn't only about the numbers. We're building trust within these communities, not just treating symptoms. When people feel respected and understood, they're more likely to seek care and stay engaged with their health." Benjamin's expression remained unreadable. Trust is important, but so is scalability. If we want to help more people, we need a model that works on a large scale. Sentimentality won't keep these clinics open. Their conversations often ended in a stalemate, leaving Ava to wonder if there was a way to blend her compassionate approach with Benjamin's hardline focus on growth. She feared that as the project grew, the human element, the core of what Leah had instilled in her, might be lost. One night, Ava confided her worries to Leah over dinner. "I feel like I'm being pulled in two directions," she admitted. "Benjamin's support is invaluable, but sometimes I wonder if I'm losing sight of why we started this." Leah placed a reassuring hand on Ava's. "You're a bridge, Ava. You're the one who can connect both worlds, Benjamin's drive for progress and your commitment to people. Don't let go of that. It's what makes you a leader." Inspired by Leah's words, Ava decided to develop a hybrid model that would satisfy both sides. She proposed a mentorship program within the clinics, where local residents could be trained as health ambassadors, helping to spread information and build trust while creating a more sustainable model. This approach would address Benjamin's scalability concerns while allowing Ava to maintain her emphasis on community engagement. The idea was met with mixed reactions. Benjamin remained skeptical, voicing doubts about the cost and effectiveness of such an initiative, but Ava pressed on. She believed that empowering local residents to take on roles within the clinics would ultimately create stronger, more resilient communities. As the mentorship program rolled out, Ava saw firsthand how it changed the dynamics in each clinic. In one town, a retired schoolteacher named Doris took on the role of health ambassador, reaching out to families, organizing health fairs, and sharing information about preventive care. Her involvement drew more people to the clinic and helped ease fears and misconceptions. In another location, a former nurse stepped up to guide mothers through prenatal and postnatal care, becoming a trusted figure in her neighborhood. Though the program wasn't without its challenges, it brought an unexpected benefit. Each clinic began to reflect the unique culture and spirit of its community. And that, Ava realized, was the real foundation of lasting change. One evening, Ava received a call from Benjamin. "Ava, I've been going over the latest reports. I see the mentorship program has gained some traction," he said, sounding cautious yet intrigued. "But I want to know, is it really making a difference, or is it just another feel-good initiative?" "Come see for yourself," Ava replied without hesitation. "Visit one of the clinics. Talk to the people there. See what it's doing firsthand." To her surprise, Benjamin accepted her invitation. The following week, they visited a clinic together, where they were greeted by a group of health ambassadors eager to share their experiences. As Benjamin spoke with Doris and the other ambassadors, he seemed to absorb their stories, the impact they were having, and the community's response. By the end of the visit, Benjamin was quiet, but his demeanor had shifted. He no longer looked at Ava's project with the same guarded skepticism. Instead, he saw the people behind the numbers, the lives they were touching, the families who were finding hope. As they prepared to leave, Benjamin turned to Ava. "I underestimated you," he said simply. "I still have my concerns, but I see now that there's value in what you're doing." Ava smiled, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. It was a tentative victory, but it meant everything. For the first time, she felt that her vision and Benjamin's ambitions might coexist, and together, they could drive the project forward without compromising on either values or results. Back at the estate, Ava shared the news with Leah, who hugged her tightly. "I knew you could do it," Leah said, pride radiating from her. "This is what it means to lead with heart and strength." As Ava lay in bed that night, she felt an unfamiliar yet exhilarating sense of balance. She was navigating a world that demanded both empathy and pragmatism, and she was finding her own way to make it work. The progress was undeniable, but so were the cracks beginning to show. Ava's clinics continued to make a difference, drawing in more people and bringing essential healthcare to underserved communities. The mentorship program was flourishing, and Benjamin, though initially resistant, started to view the initiative with a newfound respect. For a while, it seemed like they were on a path to achieving something monumental. Yet, with expansion came unforeseen challenges. Ava found herself stretched thin, managing multiple clinics and navigating an endless stream of logistical, financial, and interpersonal issues. The deeper she delved into each community's needs, the more she realized how complex and unique each situation was. No two towns had the same obstacles, and each required a tailored approach. One evening, as Ava was reviewing her notes on the latest clinic, she received an urgent call from one of her team members at the clinic in Clearwater. "Ava, we've had an incident," the voice on the other end said, shaky with tension. "Some community members are upset. They're saying the clinic is biased, that we're only serving certain groups and neglecting others." Ava's heart sank. She had worked so hard to ensure the clinics were safe, inclusive spaces for everyone, but misunderstandings and tensions could still arise in areas where distrust ran deep. She immediately scheduled a visit to Clearwater, hoping to diffuse the situation before it escalated further. The next morning, Ava arrived in Clearwater and met with the clinic staff and local leaders. The source of the tension became clear. An older community leader, Marjorie, felt that the clinic was favoring younger patients, neglecting elderly residents like herself who also needed support. Marjorie's voice quivered with frustration. "We've lived here our whole lives, and now we're pushed aside? The young people have every opportunity, but what about us? I just want to feel that we're valued too." Ava listened carefully, aware of the deep-rooted concerns. She addressed Marjorie and the other elders who shared her sentiment, validating their concerns and explaining the clinic's purpose. "This clinic is here for everyone, and your voices matter. We'll make adjustments to ensure you're given the care and attention you deserve," Ava assured them, promising to implement specific hours for elderly patients and workshops tailored to their needs. The meeting took a toll on Ava, but by the end, tensions had eased, and Marjorie thanked her for listening. Ava returned home, exhausted yet relieved. The incident had been a reminder of just how fragile the balance was. Every step forward brought new responsibilities and, often, new misunderstandings. But she couldn't lose sight of the goal. Each challenge was a necessary part of the journey. Back at the estate, Leon noticed the exhaustion in Ava's face and encouraged her to take some time off. "You've been going nonstop, Ava. You need to recharge. Even just a weekend away might help clear your mind." Ava initially resisted, but eventually, she agreed. She decided to spend the weekend at a small lakeside cabin she'd rented a few hours away. There, surrounded by nature, she allowed herself to breathe deeply, away from the demands of the clinics and the pressures of managing such an expansive project. As Ava sat by the lake one morning, a light rain began to fall, creating ripples on the water's surface. She found herself reflecting on the journey so far, the triumphs, the struggles, and the people who had come into her life along the way. She thought of Benjamin, who, despite his hard-edged approach, had shown glimpses of understanding. She thought of Marjorie, who represented so many voices often left unheard, and she thought of Leah, whose unwavering support had been her guiding light. That night, as she lay in bed, Ava felt an unexpected sense of peace. She realized that while the path was difficult, it was exactly where she needed to be. She would face challenges, but they were signs that she was making a real impact. She fell asleep with renewed resolve, ready to return to the clinics and continue building the vision she and Leah had shared. But Ava's reprieve was short-lived. Upon her return, she received a call from Benjamin, his voice tight with urgency. "Ava, we have a problem. I just got word from a local politician who's been following our project. He wants to know why we haven't been more transparent with our financial reports." Ava felt a knot form in her stomach. Transparency had always been a priority, but with the rapid expansion, she hadn't anticipated the scrutiny that would come from outside stakeholders. She assured Benjamin she'd take immediate action to address the concern, but she could sense his frustration building. Over the next few days, Ava and her team worked tirelessly to gather and organize every financial report and expenditure record. She personally reviewed the documents, ensuring they were thorough and accurate, then submitted them to Benjamin with a promise to establish regular updates going forward. But as she awaited his response, Ava couldn't shake the sense that the project was slipping into a space where paperwork and politics began to overshadow the very purpose of the clinics. She worried that Benjamin's growing network of influential partners and his focus on appeasing them could threaten the authenticity of her work. One evening, Ava called Leah to vent her frustrations. "This isn't what I signed up for, Leah. All this bureaucracy, the constant balancing act, it's draining me. I feel like I'm being pulled in every direction but forward." Leah's voice was calm and reassuring. "Ava, every great cause comes with obstacles, but remember why you started this. Stay true to that purpose. Don't let anyone, not even Benjamin, steer you away from it." With Leah's words echoing in her mind, Ava knew she had to find a way to protect the heart of her project, even if it meant confronting Benjamin and redefining their partnership. She drafted a proposal outlining her vision for maintaining community-centered goals while addressing the demands of their partners and investors. Her proposal emphasized the importance of empowering local voices, building trust, and ensuring that expansion would never come at the expense of the clinic's core values. The next morning, Ava scheduled a meeting with Benjamin to present her proposal. He listened intently, his gaze piercing but unreadable. She made her case passionately, explaining that while she appreciated his support, she needed to have a say in how the project evolved. When she finished, Benjamin was silent for a moment. "Ava, you're asking for a lot of autonomy. This isn't just a passion project anymore. It's a multi-million-dollar initiative. There's a lot on the line." "I understand that," Ava replied, unwavering. "But if we lose the heart of this project, it's just another business venture. That's not what we set out to build." Benjamin leaned back, studying her, and then gave a slight nod. "I respect your dedication, Ava. I'll give you the space you need, but I'll also hold you accountable for the results." With a renewed sense of determination, Ava left the meeting, knowing the road ahead would be even more challenging. But she was ready to fight for her vision and protect the integrity of the clinics, even as new pressures and adversities loomed on the horizon. A storm was brewing, and Ava could feel it in every fiber of her being. The tension between Ava and Benjamin had eased after their conversation, but it was clear that her independence came at a cost. Benjamin was more hands-off, which was a relief, yet he had also become more distant, seemingly waiting to see if she could hold up her end of their uneasy compromise. Determined to prove herself, Ava poured her energy into the clinics, working alongside her team to expand their reach while maintaining the personal touch that defined her approach. But she soon noticed subtle resistance in places where she'd once felt welcomed. Staff members at certain clinics were beginning to report issues, supplies were delayed, and some local leaders were less responsive than before. One morning, Ava received a concerning call from one of her longest-standing colleagues, Dr. Harlow, at the new clinic in Crestview. "Ava, I don't know how to say this, but some of the council members here are pushing back on the funding requests. They say they're not seeing enough transparency or progress to justify the expenses." Dr. Harlow paused, then added, "And Ava." They mentioned Benjamin by name. Ava's heart sank. This was more than just logistical red tape. It was a power play. She suspected that the council members' concerns were rooted in local politics, with Benjamin's influence becoming a growing source of contention. Ava thanked Dr. Harlow and assured her that she'd take care of it, but the call left her unsettled. She decided to confront the situation head-on. That afternoon, Ava arranged a meeting with the Crestview council members, eager to clarify her vision and reaffirm the importance of the clinic in their community. But as she made her case, it became evident that their concerns extended beyond funding or transparency. One of the council members, a sharp-tongued older man named Mayor Carson, spoke up, his tone dripping with skepticism. "Ms. Collins, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but let's be realistic. This clinic may be beneficial, but it also draws attention, and not all of it is good. We've seen an influx of outsiders, people who aren't from Crestview, taking advantage of services meant for our residents." Ava tried to mask her frustration. "Mayor Carson, healthcare should be accessible to everyone, regardless of where they're from. This clinic isn't just for Crestview. It's for the entire region." The mayor's eyes narrowed. "And that's precisely the problem. Our resources are limited, and we need to prioritize our own. I suggest you reconsider your approach if you want continued support from this council." The meeting ended with an uneasy truce, but Ava left feeling as though she'd just been handed an ultimatum. Back at her office, she sifted through recent reports and realized the scale of the issue. The Crestview Clinic's patient numbers were climbing faster than anticipated, drawing in people from neighboring towns with even fewer healthcare options. It was precisely the impact she had hoped for, yet it was also straining local resources, fueling resentment among residents who felt overlooked. In the days that followed, Ava wrestled with her options. Closing off access to certain patients was out of the question, but she knew she needed to ease the tensions. After consulting with her team, she devised a new strategy, establishing temporary outreach events in the neighboring towns to help manage patient flow and alleviate pressure on Crestview's clinic. However, just as she was implementing the new strategy, another challenge surfaced. A local news outlet ran a story questioning the transparency of Ava's project, casting doubt on her leadership and linking the clinic's issues to her partnership with Benjamin. The article hinted that their motives weren't as altruistic as they appeared, suggesting that the project was more about Benjamin's influence than genuine community aid. The article quickly spread, casting a shadow over everything Ava had worked for. She felt sick as she read the comments, each one harsher than the last, as residents began to question her integrity and the motives behind the clinics. For the first time, Ava questioned whether she'd made a mistake by partnering with Benjamin. His name carried weight, but it also attracted scrutiny that threatened to undermine her work. Ava knew she couldn't ignore the growing doubts. She contacted Benjamin, who, to her surprise, had already read the article. He invited her to his estate that evening, saying only, "We need to talk." When Ava arrived, she found Benjamin waiting in his study, his face unreadable. He gestured for her to sit, and for a moment, there was only silence as he studied her. "Ava, I brought you in because I believed in your vision," he began. "But you need to understand that when you expand on this scale, people start watching. They look for weaknesses, any hint that you're not in control. This article didn't come out of nowhere." Ava met his gaze, frustration simmering beneath the surface. "Are you saying this is my fault?" Benjamin sighed, his expression softening. "No, but I am saying that part of leading is managing perceptions. You have to show people that you're not just passionate, you're capable of handling the scrutiny that comes with the spotlight." Ava's frustration gave way to a new determination. She realized that while Benjamin's approach was often cutthroat, he wasn't entirely wrong. If she was going to protect the integrity of her clinics, she needed to get ahead of the rumors and control the narrative. The next day, Ava held a press conference, addressing the article's claims head-on. She spoke candidly about the challenges the clinics faced, acknowledging the strain on local resources but emphasizing her commitment to transparency and inclusivity. She announced her plan to implement outreach events in neighboring areas to manage patient flow and assured the public that every penny of funding was accounted for, with detailed reports available for anyone who wished to see them. As she wrapped up her statement, Ava looked out at the audience, her voice steady. "These clinics were built on the belief that healthcare is a right, not a privilege. I stand by that belief, and I will do everything in my power to make sure these clinics serve the people who need them, without compromising the communities they call home. The press conference was a gamble, but it paid off. The coverage was largely positive, with many reporters praising Ava's transparency and dedication. Residents began to see her as a leader who wasn't afraid to face challenges openly, and trust began to rebuild. In the days that followed, Ava focused on reinforcing the clinic's operations, strengthening ties with local leaders, and ensuring her team had the resources they needed. But she knew this was only one battle in a long war. The clinics had become more than just a project. They were a symbol of something bigger, a fight for equitable healthcare that wouldn't go unchallenged. That evening, Leah called to congratulate her on the press conference. "Ava, you handled that brilliantly. You showed everyone that you're not just a visionary, you're a leader. I'm so proud of you." Ava smiled, grateful for Leah's support. "It's not over yet, but thank you. I needed that." As she hung up, Ava realized that while the challenges were far from over, she was ready for whatever came next. She would fight for these clinics, no matter how many storms came her way. She was determined to prove that healthcare wasn't a privilege, and she wouldn't let anyone take that dream away. The winds of change are rarely gentle, and Ava could feel the gusts growing stronger every day. As the aftermath of the press conference settled, Ava found herself thrust into an even more complicated web of power dynamics. Despite her best efforts to stabilize public opinion, the forces behind the pushback against her clinics were more organized than she realized. The alliance of local politicians and rival business interests was pushing hard to keep her initiatives in check. And now, it wasn't just the community that was questioning her. Benjamin's name, too, was becoming a lightning rod for controversy. Ava had always been able to compartmentalize her work and personal life, but things were different now. The lines between the two were blurring, especially with Benjamin's growing involvement in the operations. Despite his earlier assurances, his quiet strategic maneuvers were beginning to make her feel more like a pawn than a partner. She had just finished a meeting with her outreach coordinators when her phone buzzed with an urgent message from Dr. Harlow. The Crestview Clinic had been the target of a break-in. Ava's stomach churned as she read the text. "Someone tried to steal patient records last night. Police are here now, but the damage could be significant." She didn't hesitate. Ava grabbed her jacket and headed out, her mind racing with 1,000 possibilities. As she drove to the clinic, her thoughts swirled between anger and disbelief. What kind of person would target a healthcare facility, let alone one that was working to help people in need? She had to get to the bottom of this, but deep down, she feared that it wasn't just a random act of vandalism. When she arrived, the police were already on the scene. Dr. Harlow was speaking with an officer, her face pale. Ava walked up to her, and Dr. Harlow's eyes widened in concern. "Ava, thank God you're here," she said, her voice shaking. "They didn't get the files, but they trashed everything. The computers, the file cabinets, nothing's been left untouched. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were looking for." Ava's heart sank. This wasn't just some petty crime. It was an attack. She turned to the officer overseeing the scene. "Do you have any leads?" Ava asked, her voice firm despite the storm of emotions roiling inside her. The officer, a young woman with a determined expression, shook her head. "No, ma'am. We're still investigating, but there are no obvious suspects. There's been no sign of forced entry either, which means the perpetrator may have known how to access the building without triggering alarms." Ava thought back to her earlier conversation with Mayor Carson. It struck her like a bolt of lightning. What if this wasn't just about the clinic? What if someone was trying to send a message to her personally? She couldn't afford to ignore the possibility that this could be a calculated attack on her reputation. "I want a full investigation," she told the officer, "and I need to be updated every step of the way. This wasn't random, and we need to figure out who's behind this before they escalate." As she spoke, a chill ran down her spine. Whoever was behind this knew how to strike at the heart of her operation. Her patients' privacy, her team's morale, and her ability to run the clinic smoothly. It was a warning shot. After the police finished their initial investigation, Ava and Dr. Harlow walked through the wreckage of the clinic. The sight of the damaged computers and torn files left Ava feeling sick to her stomach, but she knew she couldn't let it break her. "This isn't just about stealing data, is it?" Ava said softly as she surveyed the damage. Dr. Harlow nodded. No, it feels more personal. Someone's trying to shut us down. The two of them shared a look, both realizing that the same forces they had faced before were likely responsible. The pushback from local politicians, the media smear campaign. It was all coming together. This was no longer just a fight for healthcare access. It was a battle for control of the town, and Ava had become the primary target. I'm going to take this all the way to the top, Ava said, her voice hardening with resolve. We can't let them win. They're not just attacking a clinic, they're attacking everything we stand for. Dr. Harlow gave her a reassuring nod, but Ava could see the worry in her eyes. This was getting dangerous, and they both knew it. The days that followed were a blur of meetings, security upgrades, and rallying her team. Ava's phone was flooded with calls from her staff, local leaders, and even the media, all asking for updates or offering support. The investigation into the break-in had hit a dead end, with no new leads and no arrests. But Ava wasn't content to sit back and wait for answers. Determined to protect her clinic and her team, Ava took the offensive. She reached out to some of the local reporters who had previously been skeptical of her clinics, offering them an exclusive look behind the scenes at the work they were doing. The media, once a source of scrutiny, became her platform to defend the work she and her team had been doing in the community. Her first interview was with a journalist named Nick Hammond, a seasoned reporter known for his sharp questions and unbiased coverage. Ava knew he wasn't easily swayed, but she also knew that if she could win him over, it might help shift public opinion in her favor. The interview took place at the Crestview Clinic, amid the ongoing cleanup. Ava spoke candidly about the challenges they were facing, from the break-in to the smear campaigns, and the personal toll it had taken on her. But she also highlighted the successes, how they had treated over 10,000 patients in the last year, how the clinic had become a lifeline for underserved communities. Nick's questions were pointed, but Ava met each one with grace and honesty. By the end of the interview, he had softened. I can see how much this means to you, Nick said as he packed up his equipment. I'll make sure the story reflects the bigger picture. You're doing good work, Ava. Don't let anyone make you think otherwise. Ava felt a surge of relief, but she knew this was just one small victory. There were still many battles to fight. The following week, as Ava was preparing for another round of outreach meetings, Benjamin called. I've been following what's been happening with the clinic, he said, his voice calm but with an edge that Ava couldn't quite place. You've done well to stand your ground, but I'm getting the sense that this situation is more complicated than we thought. Ava paused, uneasy. What do you mean? Benjamin's voice grew colder. There are forces at play here that are bigger than Crestview. If you want to keep moving forward, you'll need to be prepared for what's coming. And you'll need my help. Ava felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She had been hoping to avoid involving Benjamin too deeply, but the weight of what was happening made it clear. The stakes had just gotten much higher. Every decision Ava made from here on out would be weighed in the balance, with consequences she couldn't yet foresee. The days following Benjamin's cryptic phone call were filled with mounting tension. Ava had always prided herself on being a hands-on leader, someone who relied on her own instincts and judgment. But Benjamin's words lingered in her mind. The more she thought about them, the more she realized that he wasn't just talking about political pressure. He was speaking about something much larger, something shadowy that she hadn't yet fully understood. Still, Ava wasn't the type to bow to fear. Her clinics, her patients, her team, they all depended on her. And she wasn't going to let anyone, or anything, take that away. So, she chose to stay the course. But the more she dug into the layers of opposition, the more complicated things became. Ava sat at her desk that evening, scrolling through endless emails, trying to find any small clue that might lead her to the source of the attacks. Most of the messages were routine, some from donors, others from local activists supporting her efforts, but then there was one that caught her attention, a note from Dr. Harlow. It was brief, but to the point. I'm hearing rumors that there's more going on than we realize. Be careful, Ava. The message was disconcerting. Ava had always trusted Dr. Harlow, but her latest words suggested a shift, perhaps even a deeper concern than she had let on before. She needed to speak with her. Now, picking up the phone, Ava dialed Dr. Harlow's number and waited. After a few rings, Dr. Harlow answered, her voice unusually strained. Ava. Dr. Harlow sounded worried. I didn't think you'd get that message so soon. I've been hearing more than I care to. Something isn't right, and I think we're missing a piece of the puzzle. Ava's pulse quickened. What do you mean? What have you heard? There's talk, Ava. Some of the people who are opposed to the clinic, they're not just local. I think there's outside money involved. Big players, people with deep pockets. I don't know who they are yet, but they've got resources, and they're pulling strings behind the scenes. The break-in wasn't random. It was a message. Ava's breath caught in her throat. This was far worse than she'd feared. Are you saying they're orchestrating this from outside the town? I don't have proof yet, but that's what it's starting to look like. Whoever is behind this, they want to bury us, our work, our progress. And it's bigger than just a few angry business owners or corrupt politicians. We're talking about people who could shut this whole thing down with a single phone call. Ava's mind raced. If there were indeed external forces involved, the fight for the clinic had just grown exponentially more dangerous. She had no choice but to dig deeper into this shadowy network. Do you have any leads? Ava asked, keeping her voice steady despite the anxiety clawing at her. There's a name that's come up, Dr. Harlow said. A man named Vincent DeMarco. He's not a local, but he's been tied to some of the major opponents of your clinics. I don't know much about him, but I've heard rumors. He's got a reputation for getting his hands dirty when it comes to shutting down social programs he doesn't like. If he's involved, you need to be careful. The name hit Ava like a punch to the gut. Vincent DeMarco. She'd heard whispers of the name before, but she had always dismissed it as part of the usual small-town gossip. Now it seemed more than likely that he was the mastermind behind the resistance she was facing. I'll find out more about him, Ava said, her voice hardening with determination. Thank you for telling me. Keep your head down and stay safe. I will, Dr. Harlow replied, but there was an undercurrent of fear in her voice that Ava couldn't ignore. Be careful, Ava. We're not just fighting against local opposition anymore. We're up against something much bigger than we imagined. As the call ended, Ava was left with a sense of foreboding. She could feel the walls closing in, but she refused to back down. If DeMarco and his allies were involved, they were playing a dangerous game, and Ava intended to play by her own rules. The next few days were a blur of research, phone calls, and strategizing. Ava reached out to her contacts in the community, trying to uncover any information she could about Vincent DeMarco. The more she learned, the darker the picture became. DeMarco was a businessman with ties to several powerful corporate entities that had long been involved in lobbying against public healthcare initiatives. His company, DeMarco Enterprises, was known for aggressively pursuing its interests in the healthcare sector, often resorting to underhanded tactics to neutralize competition. Rumor had it that DeMarco had a network of influential connections, from corrupt politicians to shady investors, all of whom had a vested interest in seeing Ava's clinics fail. Ava's mind raced as she put the pieces together. The break-in at Crestview, the smear campaigns, the orchestrated delays in receiving permits, all of it pointed to one thing. DeMarco was targeting her, and he wasn't going to stop until he succeeded. But Ava wasn't going to let him win. She needed to confront him directly, to understand his motivations and, more importantly, to expose him for what he was. She couldn't do it alone, though. She'd need a strategy, one that was just as underhanded as DeMarco's, if not more so. The only person Ava knew who could help her with that kind of maneuvering was Benjamin. His connections, his resources, he could be the key to getting the upper hand. Ava made the call, her voice steady but filled with resolve. Benjamin, we need to talk. It's about DeMarco. I figured you'd come around, Benjamin replied. His voice was calm, almost too calm, as if he'd expected this conversation. Meet me tonight. I'll fill you in on everything you need to know. Ava agreed, setting a time and location for their meeting. She wasn't sure what to expect from Benjamin anymore. His offer of help felt both like a lifeline and a potential trap. But she had no choice. DeMarco was a threat she couldn't take on alone. As the evening approached, Ava couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get even more complicated. The fight for her clinics was no longer just a local battle. It was a war against forces she barely understood. But Ava was no stranger to battles. She had fought for everything she had, and she wasn't about to stop now. In the murky world of power and influence, Trust was a commodity more precious than gold, and Ava had learned the hard way that not everyone could be trusted. The evening was cool, a soft breeze sweeping through the streets of Crestview as Ava made her way to the meeting spot Benjamin had suggested. The small cafe tucked away at the corner of Main Street seemed to be a place where shadows gathered, as if the world outside had forgotten about the whispers of secrets exchanged behind closed doors. Ava wasn't sure what Benjamin was planning, but she knew one thing. This meeting could either be her breakthrough or her undoing. She arrived early, as always, wanting to be in control of the situation. The dim light from the street lamp outside the cafe cast long shadows across the sidewalk, making it feel like she was walking into an ambush. Yet, Ava was determined to take control of her future, even if it meant dealing with people who operated in the gray areas of morality. The line between ally and adversary was thin in the world she had entered, and she couldn't afford to make any mistakes. She pushed open the door of the cafe and scanned the room. Benjamin was already seated at a table in the back, a dark suit outlining his frame, his posture exuding confidence. His eyes flicked up as she approached, a slight smirk tugging at his lips. She couldn't quite tell if he was being genuine or if his calm demeanor was a carefully crafted mask. Either way, Ava wasn't going to let her guard down. "You're punctual," Benjamin said, standing to greet her. "I like that. Please, have a seat." Ava took a chair across from him, her gaze never leaving his face. She wasn't here for small talk. She had a single question, and she intended to get answers. "I've done some digging into DeMarco," she said, cutting straight to the point. "I know what he's capable of, and I'm not afraid to take him on. But I need to know what you're offering me, Benjamin. What's your stake in this? And how do I know I can trust you?" Benjamin didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his hands clasped in front of him, a thoughtful expression crossing his features. "You're not the first person to question me," he said calmly, "and you won't be the last. But I'm not asking you to trust me without reason. I've got my own reasons for wanting DeMarco out of the picture. Let's just say I've had my fair share of run-ins with him before. I'm not looking to make friends here. I'm looking to make sure that you come out on top." Ava wasn't convinced. She had heard that line before, from people who only wanted something in return. But Benjamin's past connections with DeMarco piqued her interest. If he was telling the truth, he could be an invaluable ally. "And what exactly do you expect in return?" Ava asked, keeping her voice steady. "Help me expose DeMarco's dirty deals," Benjamin replied, his voice low. "The man has his fingers in so many pies that it's a miracle he hasn't been caught yet. But the right pressure, the right evidence, it could bring everything crashing down. And you'll be the one to deliver the final blow." Ava narrowed her eyes. "So you're asking me to risk everything, to go after a man who's capable of destroying lives? What's your angle in this? You want me to take down the bad guy, but I can't shake the feeling that I'm being played." Benjamin's expression hardened slightly, but he didn't seem angry. Instead, it was as if he was revealing something deeper, something only those in his position would understand. "You're a smart woman, Ava," he said. "I'm not asking you to take him down for nothing. DeMarco has made powerful enemies over the years, and I'm one of them. But this isn't just about revenge. It's about making sure that the future of healthcare doesn't get hijacked by someone like him. He's a snake, and snakes have a way of getting under your skin, making everything seem like business as usual until it's too late. If we stop him now, it's not just your clinics we're saving. It's everyone who believes in a fair shot at healthcare, no matter who they are or where they come from." Ava considered his words. Part of her still wasn't sure if she could trust him, but the more she thought about it, the more she realized that she had few options left. DeMarco had already proven he was willing to destroy her work. And if Benjamin was right, if there were others like him who wanted to see DeMarco taken down, then maybe, just maybe, this was her chance to level the playing field. "All right," Ava said, finally, "I'll work with you. But we do this my way. No loose ends, no backdoor deals. If we're going to do this, we do it together, on our terms." Benjamin's smile widened, and Ava couldn't tell if it was satisfaction or something else entirely. "I wouldn't expect anything less from you." As they began to outline their plan, Ava's mind raced. The pieces were finally starting to come together, but she knew that the road ahead would be treacherous. Benjamin was right about one thing. DeMarco wasn't just any opponent. He had the power, the influence, and the money to make anyone who crossed him disappear without a trace. But Ava wasn't going to disappear. She was going to fight. The plan was simple: find the leverage they needed, gather the evidence, and expose DeMarco for the fraud he was. But simple plans often had unexpected twists, and Ava wasn't naive enough to think that things would go off without a hitch. After hours of brainstorming, they had a framework. Benjamin's contacts would help Ava gain access to some of DeMarco's more secretive dealings: financial records, emails, anything that could connect him to the shady practices Ava had long suspected. They would need to move quickly. Time was running out, and DeMarco's influence was growing stronger by the day. Ava stood up, ready to leave. "This is it, then. We start gathering evidence tomorrow." Benjamin nodded, his eyes glinting with something unreadable. "It's a dangerous game, Ava, but you've already shown you're not afraid to play it." Ava walked out of the cafe, the night air cool against her skin. She knew the stakes had just been raised. There was no turning back now. The fight for her clinics had evolved into a battle for something far larger: control over the future of healthcare. And she was ready to take the fight to the heart of DeMarco's empire. The first step into the darkness is always the hardest, but once you're in, there's no turning back. The next morning, Ava found herself standing outside the sprawling glass and steel office complex that housed DeMarco's empire. She had always imagined the man to be more of a shadowy figure, operating behind the scenes, but seeing his business in person only reinforced her fears. The building was sleek, modern, and imposing. Everything it needed to be to hide the rot beneath its polished exterior. Ava was dressed in professional attire, blending in with the other employees coming and going, none of them giving her a second glance. She had spent the previous night carefully crafting a plan. She would gain access to DeMarco's inner circle, pose as an associate looking to secure funding for a new project, and use that as a cover to access his financial records. It was risky, but it was the only way she could get close without raising suspicion. She stood in front of the elevator, taking a deep breath. The lobby was filled with expensive decor: gold trim on the furniture, marble floors that gleamed in the sunlight pouring through the high-rise windows. No one here would suspect that beneath all this luxury, lives were being destroyed. But Ava wasn't naive. She had heard the rumors about DeMarco's dealings. The man had made his fortune by exploiting the weak, by using people like her, people who had dedicated their lives to improving others, to further his own agenda. She had to stop him, and this was her chance to find the evidence that would bring him down. The elevator doors opened, and a well-dressed woman stepped out. She offered Ava a polite smile before heading toward the security desk. Ava stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the 23rd floor, where DeMarco's personal office was located. The doors closed, and for a brief moment, Ava felt the weight of what she was about to do settle over her. She had already risked so much to get this far, but there was no turning back now. As the elevator ascended, she mentally ran through her plan once more. She would need to get into the back offices, bypass security, and find the files she needed. All the while, she had to remain calm, keep her cool. DeMarco's security was tight, but she had done her research, and she knew there were gaps she could exploit. When the elevator doors opened, Ava stepped into the hallway. She glanced around, noticing the few employees walking briskly toward their offices, none of them paying her any mind. She walked confidently toward the office suites, her heart pounding in her chest. She was getting closer. She approached the receptionist's desk, a young woman in her 20s who looked up as Ava neared. Ava offered her most charming smile, confident that she could charm her way past anyone. "Good morning," Ava said, making her voice sound light and friendly. "I'm here to meet with Mr. DeMarco's assistant, Jessica. I was told she'd be expecting me." The receptionist, a young woman with dark hair tied back in a tight ponytail, hesitated for a moment. Ava held her breath, praying that her cover story was solid enough. "I'm sorry, I don't have you listed for any meetings," the receptionist said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Ava smiled politely and leaned over the desk slightly. "Oh, I spoke with Jessica yesterday, and she said she'd send me up today. Perhaps you could just double-check? It's about securing some additional funding for the new clinic expansion." The receptionist typed something into her computer, her fingers moving quickly over the keyboard. For a moment, Ava thought her heart might explode from the tension. But then, the receptionist looked back up and smiled. "Ah, I see. It seems Jessica forgot to update the schedule. I'll let you up right away." Ava's heart skipped a beat. She had made it through the first hurdle. "Thank you," Ava said, keeping her tone light as the receptionist buzzed her through. The door to the back offices opened, and Ava stepped through. The first thing she noticed was the stark contrast between the high-end, polished lobby and the dimly lit office hallway she now walked through. The hallway was lined with closed doors, and the muffled sound of voices could be heard faintly from behind them. But she didn't have time to waste. She needed to get to the files, fast. She had studied the floor plan of the building the night before, memorizing the location of DeMarco's private office and the storage room where he kept his confidential documents. Ava's heart raced as she walked, keeping her head down and her steps steady. She passed a couple of employees talking quietly near the water cooler, but didn't stop to engage with them. This was no time for distractions. When she finally reached the door to the storage room, she stopped. No one was in sight, but the door had a keypad entry. She didn't have the access code. "Think, Ava," she muttered under her breath. There had to be another way in. She glanced around, trying to keep her composure. Then, she spotted it, the small maintenance closet at the end of the hallway. It wasn't much, but if she could gain access to the keycard stored there, she might be able to open the door. The last thing she wanted was to get caught with no way out. She walked quickly, but carefully, to the closet, making sure no one was watching her. She tried the door, relieved to find it unlocked. Inside, there were cleaning supplies, but more importantly, a rack of keycards hanging on the wall. She took a deep breath and scanned the cards, hoping one would work. She chose the one labeled Executive Access and slipped it into her pocket. The next few minutes felt like a blur. Ava returned to the storage room and swiped the keycard across the reader. The light turned green, and the door clicked open. She slipped inside, breathing a sigh of relief. The room was small, but it was stacked with files. Files that could either be the proof she needed or the end of her career. She moved quickly, pulling drawers open and scanning the documents. There were records of financial transactions, contracts with dubious companies, and emails that made her skin crawl. This was the proof. She could feel it in her gut. But just as she was about to grab the most incriminating file, she heard footsteps approaching. Someone was coming. Ava's heart pounded in her chest. She had seconds to make a decision. Take the file and risk getting caught, or leave without it and come back another day. But she couldn't leave without it. This was too big. With her hands shaking, she grabbed the file, stuffed it into her bag, and headed toward the back exit, praying she wouldn't be seen. Sometimes, the weight of the truth is heavier than you ever imagined. Ava's heart was still racing as she walked back to her car. She could feel the cool sweat clinging to the back of her neck, the file she'd stolen a heavy presence in her bag. Every step she took felt like she was walking through a fog of uncertainty. It had worked. She had gotten the file. But now came the most dangerous part, getting away. As she reached the parking lot, she kept her head down, trying to appear calm despite the chaos swirling inside her. Her eyes darted from car to car, looking for any sign that someone was watching her. She couldn't afford to let her guard down, not even for a second. DeMarco's people were everywhere, and if they were onto her, it wouldn't take long for them to realize what she had. She reached her car, a small, inconspicuous sedan that blended in with the others in the lot. Ava unlocked the door and slid inside, locking it behind her as quickly as she could. She started the engine, her hands gripping the wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. She needed to get out of the city, away from DeMarco's reach. But she couldn't go home, not yet. Her mind raced, trying to figure out where to go. She had a friend in a small town an hour away. Someone she could trust. If she could just make it there, she might have a chance to look over the file and figure out her next move. As she merged onto the highway, her phone buzzed in her pocket. Ava jumped, startled by the sound. She glanced down at it, her pulse quickening as she saw a text message from an unknown number. "I know what you did." Ava's blood ran cold. Her fingers shook as she pulled the phone from her pocket, her eyes scanning the message. How did they find her so quickly? Her mind raced, trying to make sense of it. She had been careful. She had covered her tracks. But somehow, Someone had seen her. She pulled off the highway and onto a side road, needing a moment to collect herself. She parked in a secluded spot near a small convenience store and turned off the engine. The silence in the car was deafening as she stared at the phone in her hands, the threat hanging in front of her like a sword. The text came with no name, no clue as to who was behind it. But Ava knew one thing for sure. DeMarco's people were onto her. They had to be, and they were closing in. She quickly deleted the message, not wanting to leave a trace, but her mind was already spinning. How had they found her? Was there someone in the building who had seen her? Or had someone been watching her all along? Ava looked around the empty parking lot, feeling the oppressive weight of being hunted. She wasn't safe, not yet, and she couldn't go back to the office now, not with the file in her possession. DeMarco would stop at nothing to get it back, and that meant she had to move fast. She started the car again, her mind set on getting to her friend's town. The message could have been a bluff, but she knew better than to take that risk. The fact that someone knew what she had done meant that she was no longer in control of the situation. She had to act, and she had to act fast. As she drove down the highway, Ava's mind raced through every possible scenario. There was no way DeMarco would let her keep the file. He had too much at stake. If she didn't get out of town soon, she could be walking into a trap. A couple of hours later, she finally arrived at her friend Claire's house. The small, run-down house in the middle of nowhere felt like a haven after the chaos of the city. Ava knocked on the door, her breath catching in her throat as she waited. Claire had been her closest friend back in college, someone who knew about her work and the risks involved. She would understand. The door swung open, and Claire's familiar face appeared in the doorway. Her expression shifted from surprise to concern as she saw the tension in Ava's eyes. "Ava, what's going on? What happened?" Claire asked, pulling her into the house without waiting for an answer. Ava didn't speak for a moment, trying to calm the storm of thoughts racing in her head. Finally, she sat down at the small kitchen table and took a deep breath. "I did it," Ava said, her voice low. "I got the file. But they're on to me, Claire. I'm not safe anymore." Claire's eyes widened as she reached for the coffee pot, pouring Ava a cup without saying a word. She set it in front of her, and Ava took a sip, trying to steady her nerves. She had never felt so vulnerable before, not even during the most dangerous investigations. But now, it was different. She wasn't just going after DeMarco anymore. She was in the middle of a war, and if she didn't win this battle, she might not make it out alive. "We need to go over the file," Claire said, her voice determined. "Let's see what you've got, Ava. If you've really got something, we can take it to the authorities." "No," Ava cut her off, her voice sharp. "We can't go to the authorities. Not yet. If we do, DeMarco will make sure we're both gone before we even get a chance to speak." Claire looked at her in disbelief. "Then what are we supposed to do? You can't just hide here forever." Ava hesitated, her mind racing. She knew Claire was right. She couldn't stay hidden for long. The file was too important. But the more she thought about it, the more certain she became that going public wasn't the answer. Not yet. "We need to get proof that DeMarco is connected to something bigger, something that'll make the authorities listen," Ava said slowly, her voice steadying. "This isn't just about a few bad contracts. This is about a whole network of corruption, and I need more before I can go to anyone. If I move too fast, I'll be dead before I get the chance." Claire nodded, her face hardening with determination. "Then we get you what you need. But Ava, we have to be careful. DeMarco won't stop, and we can't make any mistakes." Ava nodded, feeling the weight of the situation settle over her once more. This was bigger than just one man. It was about a system that had been built to destroy people like her, people who tried to change the world. And she wasn't going to let it win. Every decision comes with a price. The trick is knowing when to pay it. The sun had just begun to set when Ava and Claire sat down at the small kitchen table, the files spread between them. Ava's fingers traced the edge of the manila folder as though the paper itself could hold the answers to everything she needed. She felt the weight of it in her hands, heavy, not just from the contents, but from the responsibility that came with it. The file was a blueprint of corruption, a roadmap that led straight into the heart of DeMarco's empire. Claire leaned over, studying the contents with a furrowed brow. She had always been sharp, and even now, Despite the chaos, her mind was working at full speed. Ava couldn't help but feel a little grateful for that. Claire's clarity was something Ava had always depended on, especially in moments like these. "Look at this," Claire said, pointing to a series of transactions in the file. "These are payments to an offshore account, but the names listed don't make sense. They don't match up with any of the businesses DeMarco's involved with. This is money laundering, Ava." Ava's heart skipped a beat. She had suspected something like this, but seeing it written down in black and white made it real, dangerously real. This was bigger than she had imagined. DeMarco wasn't just a mob boss with a few shady deals. He was connected to a global network, laundering money through a series of businesses and shell companies. And someone high up in the government was protecting him. The evidence was right here in her hands. Ava's thoughts began to spiral. If she took this to the authorities, it wouldn't just be a matter of taking down DeMarco. She'd be exposing a vast web of corruption. There were politicians involved, law enforcement officials, businessmen who had their hands so deep in this that they'd do anything to keep it under wraps. She couldn't go public with this yet. Not until she had more. "I can't just hand this over," Ava muttered to herself, her mind working faster than her words could keep up. "If I go to the authorities now, we'll be targets. I need to know more about these names, the connections. Who's really behind all this?" Claire met her eyes, her expression unwavering. "Then we need to dig deeper. We need to find out who these people are, what they're really doing." Ava nodded slowly, a plan beginning to form in her mind. She'd need resources, people who could help her dig into this mess. But those resources wouldn't come cheap, and she couldn't afford to make a single mistake. DeMarco wasn't just after money. He was after power, and anyone who threatened that power had a price on their head. Just then, a knock on the door shattered the quiet of the room. Ava froze, her heart slamming into her chest. Claire's eyes widened, but she didn't say anything. The knock wasn't repeated, but the tension in the room was thick. "Who is it?" Claire asked in a whisper, not moving from her seat. "I don't know," Ava replied, her voice barely audible. She'd heard the knock, too, but it hadn't come from the direction of the front door. The sound had come from the back of the house, near the small kitchen window that overlooked the wooded area behind Claire's property. Ava motioned for Claire to stay put, her senses alert. She moved silently through the house, her footsteps light, her body tense with anticipation. She stopped near the kitchen window and peered through the blinds, her eyes scanning the shadows. There, just beyond the edge of the tree line, she spotted a figure. It was a man, but his features were obscured by the growing darkness of evening. Ava's breath caught in her throat. Had DeMarco's people found her already? Or was it just someone passing by? Her hand hovered over her phone, ready to dial 911 if she needed to, but she didn't want to risk giving herself away. The last thing she needed was to alert whoever was out there that they'd been spotted. The man didn't move. Instead, he seemed to be waiting. Ava's mind raced. Was he just a random passerby, or was he watching the house? "Who is it?" Claire repeated, her voice anxious from the other room. Ava held up a hand to silence her, then inched toward the door, carefully sliding it open just a crack. She wanted to listen for anything else that might give her a clue. The silence outside was suffocating. And then, just as Ava was about to close the door, the man spoke, his voice low but clear. "I'm not here to hurt you, Ava, but you're in danger. And if you don't come with me right now, you'll never get the chance to expose DeMarco." Ava's heart skipped a beat. How did he know her name? How did he know she was involved with DeMarco? The questions swirled in her head, but her instincts told her this wasn't a random encounter. She quickly closed the door and turned back to Claire. "Stay here," she whispered. "I'm going to check it out." Claire didn't protest, but her eyes were filled with concern. "Be careful, Ava." Ava stepped into the hall, her mind racing. She couldn't go back to the life she had before. There was no turning back now. Whoever this man was, he knew too much about her. And if he was right, the danger was closer than she'd thought. She grabbed her jacket from the hook by the door and slipped out into the dark, moving swiftly but carefully toward the back of the house. As she neared the tree line, she could see the figure more clearly now, tall, lean, and dressed in dark clothing, blending into the shadows as though he belonged there. When he saw her, The man stepped forward, not in an aggressive way, but with a sense of purpose. "I'm not here to cause you trouble," he repeated, his voice steady. "But you need to trust me. You've got the file, and if you don't get out of here soon, it'll be the last thing you ever have." Ava's heart raced. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice sharper than she intended. The man hesitated for a moment, his eyes scanning the surrounding area. "My name is Eric. I'm not working for DeMarco, but I know who's really pulling the strings. And you need to listen to me if you want to stay alive long enough to take him down." Ava felt her chest tighten. She had no idea who this man was, but if he was telling the truth, this was her chance. She could either trust him and get the help she needed, or she could continue going it alone and risk everything. The choice was clear. There are no safe paths when you're running from monsters. You just have to keep moving. Ava didn't hesitate. She knew that the window for escape was closing fast, and the figure in front of her was offering an answer, however dangerous it might be. Without a word, she followed Eric as he led her deeper into the woods. The silence between them was thick, the only sound the crunch of dry leaves beneath their feet and the distant calls of night creatures. It felt like the air itself was watching them, heavy with the threat of being discovered. They didn't talk as they moved. Eric didn't offer any further explanation, and Ava didn't ask. She was too aware of the urgency that pulsed through her veins, too aware that every step they took could be their last. The further they went into the woods, the more Ava realized how little she knew about this man. Eric's silhouette was barely visible in the dim light, his movements swift and sure. She had to trust him, even if everything about this felt wrong. As they reached a clearing, Eric stopped. He turned to face her, and for the first time, Ava saw his eyes clearly, dark and calculating, the kind of eyes that had seen things and survived. "Where are we going?" Ava asked, her voice quieter now, tinged with suspicion. Eric didn't meet her eyes right away. Instead, he scanned the woods, as if making sure they weren't being followed. After a moment, he nodded toward a small cabin nestled between the trees. It looked unassuming at first, but something about it screamed hidden purpose. "Inside," he said simply. "We'll talk there." Ava didn't argue. She knew better than to question his judgment now. She had no idea who he really was or why he seemed to know so much about DeMarco's operations, but she knew she had to keep moving forward. She couldn't afford to waste time on doubts. The cabin door creaked open as Eric led the way, and they stepped into the dim interior. The place smelled of wood and dust, and the only light came from a few candles scattered across the room. It was sparsely furnished, just a table, a few chairs, and a stack of maps pinned to the wall. Ava's eyes quickly swept over the papers, noting the pins marking various locations, streets, warehouses, and even government buildings. Eric moved to a small desk in the corner, pulling out a laptop and flipping it open. As he typed quickly, Ava took in the layout of the cabin, noting the lack of windows and the sturdy, locked door. This wasn't just a safe house, it was a command center. "So, who are you really?" Ava asked again, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts spinning in her head. Eric didn't look up from the screen. "Like I said, my name's Eric. I've been tracking DeMarco for years. We have a mutual acquaintance." Ava frowned. "Who?" He finally looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "Someone who doesn't want DeMarco to succeed. Someone who needs to stay off the radar." Ava's curiosity piqued. She crossed the room, standing over his shoulder. "And why should I trust you? You could be working with him for all I know." Eric's gaze didn't falter. "You can't afford not to. You've already crossed the line, Ava. You're in this whether you like it or not. If you go back now, DeMarco's people will find you. They'll make sure you never get the chance to expose him." Ava swallowed hard. He was right. There was no going back now. She had already started something that couldn't be undone. The files she'd stolen, the names she'd uncovered, they were a key to something far bigger than just DeMarco's criminal empire. She had touched the tip of the iceberg, and there was no escaping the depth of the corruption beneath. Eric clicked a few more buttons on the laptop and then turned it toward her. "This is the real reason DeMarco's so dangerous," he said, his voice low. "Look at these connections." Ava's eyes scanned the screen. The list of names was long. More politicians, more businessmen, and even a few high-ranking officials. But what made her stomach tighten was the inclusion of law enforcement officers. This wasn't just about money or power. It was about control. DeMarco had his hands in every part of the city, every branch of government, every aspect of life. He wasn't just a mob boss. He was a shadow ruler. How do you know all this? Ava asked, her voice barely a whisper. Eric leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. I've been digging for a long time, but there's still a lot I don't know. That's why I need you. Ava's brow furrowed. You need me? For what? Because you have something that I don't, Eric replied. You have the file, and you've already been inside his circle. You've seen things that most people never will. Together, we can take DeMarco down. But we have to move fast. The longer we wait, the more chances he has to cover his tracks. Ava's mind raced. She was no stranger to danger, but this was something else. It wasn't just her life on the line anymore. It was the lives of everyone around her. The stakes were higher than ever. But something about Eric's confidence reassured her, even if it was a dangerous kind of reassurance. She thought about Claire back at the house, waiting for her. Could she really trust Eric? Could she risk going further down this rabbit hole? But the truth was, she had already taken the first step. There was no way out now. I'm in, Ava said, her voice steady. But we do this my way. I want to know everything. I need to understand what I'm up against before we make any moves. Eric's lips curled into a tight smile. Fair enough. As Ava sat down at the table, she felt a shift in the air. The mission had changed. She wasn't just trying to survive anymore. She was going to fight back, and she wasn't going to stop until DeMarco, and everyone connected to him, was brought down. But in the back of her mind, one question lingered. Who could she trust when the people closest to her were just as likely to be part of the problem as they were the solution? The deeper you go, the more it feels like the walls are closing in. But the truth always has a way of finding the light. The following days were a blur of intense research, meetings in hidden corners of the city, and late nights spent poring over the details of DeMarco's operation. Ava was no stranger to danger, but the closer she got to the heart of his empire, the more unsettled she became. Eric had been helpful, but there was something about him, something in his quiet confidence, that made her uneasy. Was he really the ally he appeared to be, or was there more to his involvement than he was letting on? She shook the thought out of her head. For now, he was the best chance she had, and that had to be enough. Besides, it was too late to back out now. Ava had already gone too far. They had spent the past few days going over files, tracking down leads, and identifying key players in DeMarco's network. But what they found was staggering. DeMarco's influence reached far beyond the city, stretching into national and even international circles. The more Ava uncovered, the more she realized how much power the man had. If they were going to bring him down, they'd have to be meticulous. There could be no mistakes. But the deeper they dug, the more dangerous their situation became. It wasn't just DeMarco's men they had to worry about now. There were whispers of federal agents on the payroll, city officials who were turning a blind eye to the crimes happening right under their noses. The more Ava learned, the more it seemed like no one could be trusted. Everyone had a price. One night, as they were combing through yet another list of names, Ava's phone buzzed. It was a message from Claire. We need to talk. Meet me at the usual spot. Ava's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't seen Claire in days, not since the night they first discovered DeMarco's true reach. She glanced over at Eric, who was focused on the computer screen. Eric, she said, her voice low. I need to meet someone. I'll be back soon. Eric barely looked up, his face unreadable. Be careful. Things are getting riskier every day. Ava nodded, grabbing her jacket and heading for the door. The usual spot was an old coffee shop on the edge of town, a place where Claire and Ava had met countless times before, where they'd shared laughs, secrets, and dreams about the future. But tonight, that dream felt far away. Tonight, there was only the cold reality of the war they were about to wage. The coffee shop was nearly empty when Ava arrived, the dim light casting long shadows across the tables. She spotted Claire right away, sitting in the back corner with her back to the wall. Her eyes darted nervously around the room as Ava approached. What's going on? Ava asked as she slid into the seat across from her. You seemed urgent. Claire took a deep breath, her fingers tapping nervously on the table. I don't know who to trust anymore, Ava. I'm scared. I think someone's following me. Ava frowned. What do you mean? Who? I don't know, Claire said, her voice trembling. I've been noticing these black SUVs around the block. I thought it was nothing at first, but now I'm not so sure. Ava's heart raced. The same black SUVs she'd seen outside her own apartment. The same ones that had followed her and Eric when they went to the safe house. Claire, Ava said, leaning in close, this isn't just about DeMarco. There's something bigger going on here. We're being watched. Claire's face went pale. What do we do? We keep moving, Ava said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. We can't stop now, but we have to be smarter. We have to know who's playing us. Just then, a voice interrupted their conversation. Ava's stomach clenched as she turned toward the source. Two men had entered the coffee shop, their eyes scanning the room like predators. One of them was tall, with a scar that ran across his cheek, and the other was shorter, with a sharp, calculating look in his eyes. They were dressed in suits, too polished to be ordinary men, but too rough around the edges to be high society. Claire stiffened beside her. Ava glanced at her phone, noting the time. It was too late for a casual coffee run. Something was off, and the men approaching their table were a clear sign that it was time to leave. Without warning, Ava stood up. Let's go. Claire hesitated, but followed her lead. They made their way toward the exit, but the men were faster. They blocked the door before Ava could reach it. Leaving so soon? The tall one asked, his voice smooth and threatening. Ava's mind raced, but she didn't let the fear show on her face. We're not interested in talking to you. The shorter man stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. I think you'll change your mind. You're in a bit too deep, miss. It's best if you just come with us. Ava's pulse quickened. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She glanced at Claire, who was frozen in fear. I said, we're not interested, Ava repeated, her voice low but firm. She wasn't about to be taken without a fight. The tall man smirked. You don't have much of a choice. Ava's mind raced as she searched for an escape. The back door was too far, and the front door was blocked. There was only one thing left to do. She reached into her bag, her fingers brushing against the gun Eric had insisted she carry for protection. Before the man could react, Ava pulled it from her bag and pointed it at him. Step aside, she ordered, her voice cold. The man's eyes flickered with surprise, but he didn't move. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out his own weapon. The room seemed to freeze as the standoff began. Ava's heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't flinch. I said, step aside. The pressure is building, and you can either crumble or rise. But sometimes, even rising requires a fall first. The silence that followed was suffocating. Ava kept her gun trained on the man in front of her, her finger poised over the trigger. Every muscle in her body was coiled tight, ready to act, but her mind raced even faster. These men were not ordinary goons. They were professionals, and they weren't here for a casual chat. If she didn't play her cards right, it could all be over in an instant. The tall man who had spoken first didn't flinch at the sight of the gun. In fact, there was something almost detached in his demeanor, as though he had seen this scenario 1,000 times before. His eyes narrowed slightly, the only hint of calculation. But the shorter man, the one with the calculating look, shifted slightly, his hand moving towards his jacket. Ava's pulse quickened. If either of them pulled a weapon, there would be no room for hesitation. She had to stay in control. Look, we don't want any trouble, the tall man said, his voice smooth, yet laced with a threat. We just want to have a little conversation. You know, for your own good. Ava didn't budge. I've heard that line before. So unless you want to try something else, I suggest you get out of my way. The shorter man took a step forward, and Ava's heart skipped. She wasn't going to let him get any closer. Before he could make another move, she spoke again, her voice now edged with warning. I'm not afraid to use this. The words hung in the air, thick with tension. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in as she realized just how vulnerable they were. Claire stood frozen beside her, her eyes wide with fear. Ava shot her a quick glance, silently telling her to stay calm. The tall man raised his hands slowly, as though weighing the situation. All right, he said, his tone shifting slightly, but there was no mistaking the underlying menace. We don't need to make this harder than it is. Just put the gun down, and we can talk. No need for all this drama. Ava's mind raced. She knew these kinds of men didn't bargain. They wouldn't be satisfied with just intimidation. They had a job to do, and that job likely involved getting rid of anyone who posed a threat. She had to act quickly, before they made their move. Her instincts kicked in. Without giving them a chance to react, Ava made a sudden move to the side, pushing Claire out of the way as she bolted for the back door. The tall man cursed and lunged, but Ava was already out of reach, and Claire followed closely behind her. The door slammed open behind them as they raced into the alley. Ava's breath came in short gasps, adrenaline pumping through her veins. She didn't look back, but she could hear the men's footsteps growing louder as they gave chase. Keep running, Ava shouted to Claire, urging her to go faster. We can't let them catch us. Claire's breath was ragged, but she pushed herself harder, trusting Ava to lead the way. The alley was dark, but Ava's mind was laser-focused. They couldn't let the men get close. She had to find a way out, and fast. They turned the corner into another alley, but the footsteps behind them didn't stop. They were still coming. Ava glanced over her shoulder, just in time to see one of the men emerge from the doorway they had just passed. The tall one, looking every bit the professional. Without warning, Ava grabbed Claire's arm and pulled her toward a fire escape ladder. We're going up. Now. Claire didn't argue. She climbed up quickly, her hands trembling as she reached the top, just as Ava followed. They didn't have time to catch their breath. The ladder was a narrow escape route, but it bought them enough time to get off the ground. As they reached the rooftop, Ava scanned the surrounding area. They were on a corner of the city, with views of both the street and other nearby rooftops. A moment of peace, but only a moment. What now? Claire asked, breathless. We need to figure out where to go next, Ava said, her mind already shifting into tactical mode. We can't just keep running. We need to disappear. Suddenly, Ava's phone buzzed again. It was a message from Eric. Get to the safe house. Now. I know where they are. Ava's heart skipped. He knows. We need to move. Claire looked at her with wide eyes. But how? We're out in the open. Ava thought fast. We'll have to risk it. If Eric's right, we can make it through the back streets. Stay close and don't make any noise. The two of them moved quickly, ducking behind nearby buildings, taking cover in the shadows. It felt like every step they took brought them closer to danger. But Ava wasn't about to let her guard down. They had made it this far. They just had to stay alive long enough to bring DeMarco's empire to its knees. It wasn't long before they reached the edge of the district, where they could see the outline of the safe house in the distance. But as they approached, Ava's stomach dropped. A black SUV was parked in front of the building. Stay low, Ava whispered urgently. They're here. You thought you could escape, but the truth is, you were always one step away from being found. Ava froze when she saw the black SUV parked outside the safe house. Her heart pounded in her chest as she signaled for Claire to crouch lower. Every instinct screamed that something wasn't right. The entire situation felt like a trap, but she couldn't afford to be wrong now. Stay close and don't make a sound, Ava whispered, her eyes scanning the area. They were just a few yards from the building, but the presence of the vehicle sent a wave of unease through her. They had been running on adrenaline for hours, barely stopping to catch their breath. Ava knew they couldn't keep this pace much longer. They needed to get inside, regroup, and figure out what came next. But as they crept closer to the building, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Ava's eyes flicked to the SUV. She couldn't make out who was inside, but something told her the people in that car weren't just parked there to chat. Do you think it's DeMarco's men? Claire asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ava nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure. Could be. Or it could be someone else working for him. Either way, we can't take any chances. They moved swiftly, crouching behind a nearby dumpster to stay out of sight. Ava's mind raced. If they were caught out here, there was no telling how far this would go. She had made a lot of enemies in the past weeks, and DeMarco was just the tip of the iceberg. After a tense moment, Ava dared to look toward the entrance of the building. There was no movement, no sign of anyone approaching, but the SUV still loomed ominously in the background. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her. They had no choice now. They had to get inside. On my count, we make a run for it. Ready? Ava murmured to Claire. Claire gave a nervous nod, her fingers gripping Ava's sleeve tightly. Ready. Ava exhaled slowly, then counted off. 1, 2, 3. They both sprinted toward the door, their feet barely making a sound on the pavement. As they reached the entrance, Ava pushed the door open quietly, praying it wouldn't squeak. To her relief, it didn't. They slipped inside, hearts racing. Once they were in, Ava quickly shut the door behind them and locked it. The safe house was small but functional, with a few chairs, a table, and a couple of rooms they could hide in. She hadn't expected it to be luxurious, but it was safe, at least, for the time being. All right, we're in, Ava said, her voice low. We need to figure out who's watching us and why. Claire was still panting, her eyes wide with anxiety. Ava, what if they're already inside? What if they know we're here? Ava shook her head. They can't know we're here yet, but we need to make sure we're not being followed. I'll check the windows and see if anyone's watching us. She moved swiftly to the window, careful to keep out of sight. She peered through the blinds and scanned the area. The SUV was still parked outside, but no one had exited it yet. Ava's mind raced. If they were waiting for her, they'd likely make their move soon. But then, she noticed something odd. A figure moved past the car, but it wasn't one of DeMarco's men. It was someone she recognized. Ava, Claire whispered, coming up behind her. What is it? Ava's breath caught in her throat. There, standing in front of the SUV, was a familiar face, one she hadn't seen in months. Eric, she muttered, her voice filled with disbelief. Claire's eyes widened. Eric? What's he doing here? Ava didn't know, but one thing was clear. If Eric was involved in this, everything had just become a whole lot more complicated. Stay here, Ava said, her tone serious. I need to talk to him. Stay quiet, and don't let anyone else in until I get back. Before Claire could protest, Ava was already heading for the back door. Her mind was spinning. Eric had always been a loose cannon, but this felt different. She needed answers, and she needed them now. As Ava stepped into the alley behind the safe house, she kept her body low, staying hidden in the shadows. She moved swiftly, making sure not to alert anyone to her presence. She had to get close to Eric without being seen. The rain had started again, a soft drizzle that made the streets glisten under the dim lights. Ava's footsteps were muffled as she approached the SUV, her heart pounding in her chest. When she was just a few feet away, she paused, peering around the corner to get a better view of Eric. He was talking to someone, a tall man in a dark suit, someone she didn't recognize. The conversation seemed tense, and though she couldn't hear their words, the body language spoke volumes. Ava felt a knot form in her stomach. This wasn't just a casual meetup. This was serious. Eric was in deeper than she had ever imagined, and now it looked like he was involved in something much larger than either of them had anticipated. Without warning, the man in the suit turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. Eric stood there for a moment, his face tight with concern, before climbing into the SUV and speeding off down the street. Ava's mind raced. She had to know what was going on. Why had Eric contacted her? What did he know? She had never been good at trusting people, and right now, she didn't trust anyone. Not even Eric. She turned back toward the safe house, her mind swirling with questions. Something was happening, something that could change everything. And Ava was determined to uncover the truth, no matter what it took. The truth is a dangerous thing. Sometimes, it's better not to know. Ava's heart was still pounding as she re-entered the safe house, closing the door behind her with a quiet click. Claire was pacing near the window, her face pale with worry. Ava felt a surge of guilt, but she pushed it down. There was no time for hesitation now. Are they still out there? Claire asked, her voice tight. Ava took a deep breath and shook her head. No, they're gone. But I saw something. I saw Eric. Claire's eyes widened. Eric? What's he doing here? I thought he was gone. Ava interrupted, her voice edged with frustration. I thought so too. But he was with someone, a man in a suit. They were talking about something serious. Claire's gaze darted to the door. What does that mean? Does he know we're here? Ava stared at her, trying to piece together everything she had just witnessed. She had no answers, only more questions. Eric had been involved in something shady, and now he was connected to the same people who were after her. There was no way this was a coincidence. I don't know, Ava said, her voice low, but I need to find out. I'm going to track him down. He's the key to all of this. If I can figure out why he's involved, maybe we can stop whatever's coming next. Claire stepped forward, grabbing Ava's arm. You're going after him? Are you out of your mind? It's too dangerous. Ava met her friend's eyes. She saw the concern there, the fear, but she also knew that Claire didn't understand. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about getting to the truth, about uncovering what was really happening before it was too late. I have to do this, Ava said firmly. I have no choice. The longer I wait, the more dangerous this gets. We both know that. Claire opened her mouth to protest, but Ava cut her off. I'm going alone. Stay here. Lock the doors, stay low, and keep an eye on the streets. If you see anyone suspicious, don't hesitate to call me. Understood? Claire looked like she wanted to argue, but she simply nodded. Be careful, Ava. Ava didn't respond. She was already out the door and heading down the alley, moving swiftly and quietly. The rain had picked up again, soaking her through as she made her way to the same street where she'd seen Eric. Her mind was focused, sharp. She had to find out what was going on. She couldn't afford to make mistakes. Eric had always been unpredictable, but this was something different. He wasn't just some guy from her past anymore. He was a part of something much bigger, something that could destroy everything. Ava reached the street corner and paused. The SUV was gone, but that didn't mean Eric had disappeared. He could be anywhere. She scanned the street, her eyes darting over every shadow. Nothing seemed out of place, but Ava's instincts told her otherwise. She had to find him. Then, she saw it. A familiar figure slipping into an alley across the street. Ava's heart skipped a beat. It was him, Eric. Ava's breath hitched, and without thinking, she moved into the alley, keeping her distance but staying close enough to follow him. He was walking quickly, as if he knew someone was tailing him. Ava's gut twisted. He was trying to lose her. She picked up her pace, moving carefully, staying in the shadows. She had to get closer. She had to confront him before he disappeared again. But as she moved further into the alley, a voice suddenly rang out from behind her. Ava. She froze, her blood running cold. She recognized the voice. Slowly, she turned around. Standing there, just a few feet away, was the man in the suit, tall, imposing, with dark sunglasses even in the dim light. His expression was unreadable, but his presence was like a weight on her chest. What do you want? Ava demanded, her voice steady but with a sharp edge. The man didn't answer immediately. He simply took a step forward, blocking her path. You've been getting too close to things you don't understand, he said, his voice low, almost threatening. Ava stood her ground, her fists clenched at her sides. I'm not afraid of you, she said, though the words felt hollow in her mouth. Her heart was hammering, but she couldn't show weakness now. The man tilted his head slightly. You should be. Before Ava could react, a sharp sound echoed through the alley, a car engine revving loudly. She turned to see a black sedan speeding toward them, its headlights blinding in the dark. It stopped right in front of her, and the door opened. Without hesitation, the man in the suit stepped back and motioned for Ava to get in. You're coming with us, he said, his voice final. Ava's pulse raced. She knew she had no choice. Running wasn't an option anymore, not with him blocking her escape. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. But she wasn't going to go down without a fight. With one last defiant glance at the man, she lunged forward, grabbing the nearest object, a broken bottle from the ground, and swung it at his face. The man barely flinched, his reflexes sharp as he sidestepped. In one fluid motion, he grabbed her arm, twisting it behind her back with enough force to make her gasp in pain. I warned you, he said, his voice cold. Now, you'll regret not listening. Ava struggled, trying to break free, but the grip on her arm was like iron. She had no choice but to stop fighting or risk injuring herself further. With a sharp tug, the man forced her into the car. The doors slammed shut, and the sedan peeled away, leaving the alley behind. As the car sped down the dark streets, Ava's mind raced. Who were these people? What did they want with her? And what had Eric gotten them all involved in? The answers were just out of reach, but she was getting closer. She could feel it. The worst lies are the ones we tell ourselves. Ava's head was spinning as the car sped through the darkened streets. She was trapped, her arms still burning from the man's grip. The interior of the sedan was cold, sterile, and entirely unfamiliar. The black leather seats were polished, the faint scent of something antiseptic hanging in the air. Ava's pulse hammered in her temples, and the only thing she could focus on was the vague outline of the man in the suit sitting across from her. He hadn't said anything since he'd forced her into the car. His silence was as unnerving as his sudden appearance in the alley. She tried to steady her breath, pulling her legs closer as if it would somehow give her comfort in the small, suffocating space. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice tight but resolute. The man didn't respond at first, his gaze fixed on something outside the window. The streetlights flickered past in a blur, the speed of the car making everything outside seem like a dream. Ava had never felt so out of control in her life. The man finally turned his head, his expression unreadable. He wasn't bothered by her words. If anything, it seemed like he expected them. "You think I'm the enemy, don't you?" His voice was deep, almost gravelly, and there was an edge to it that sent a chill down her spine. "You're wrong." Ava narrowed her eyes. "Then who the hell are you?" The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gave a slight, almost imperceptible smirk. His sunglasses remained on, even in the dim interior of the car. He didn't look like someone who was going to reveal any secrets anytime soon. "You're in way over your head," he finally said. "But you'll find out soon enough." Ava's mind raced. What did he mean? Over her head? Was he part of the same group that was after her? The men in suits? The mysterious organization? There were too many unanswered questions. But one thing was certain. She wasn't going down without a fight. She leaned forward, trying to get a better look at him. "Let me go," she demanded, her voice as steady as she could make it. "I don't know what you want, but I'm not scared of you." The man's lips twitched, but it wasn't a smile. It was something far darker. "You should be." Ava's stomach tightened. Every instinct screamed at her to get out of this car, to escape while she still could. But there was nowhere to run. She had to play this smart. The car turned sharply onto another road, and Ava pressed herself into the seat, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread in her chest. The city outside seemed to disappear. The streetlights became fewer, and the houses along the road grew further apart, as if they were leaving the city behind. Finally, the car slowed and pulled into a gated area, an industrial lot surrounded by high concrete walls. Ava's eyes scanned the surroundings quickly, noting the security cameras mounted on every corner, the barbed wire along the top of the walls. This wasn't a place she'd want to be. As the sedan came to a stop, the driver, who had remained silent throughout the ride, opened the door for the man in the suit. He stepped out without a word, then turned to Ava. His eyes were unreadable behind the dark lenses. "Get out," he said coldly. Ava's mind raced. This was bad. She had to get control of the situation, or at least find a way to gain some leverage. She wasn't going down without a fight. When she didn't move immediately, the man's patience wore thin. He stepped forward, grabbing her arm and pulling her out of the car with force. Ava stumbled, but managed to stay on her feet. She couldn't show weakness now. The man walked in front of her, leading her through the entrance of the compound. It looked like some sort of abandoned warehouse or factory, the kind of place you saw in crime dramas but never in real life. Cold, concrete floors stretched ahead, and the fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long, sharp shadows on the walls. They moved through the building silently. Ava's thoughts were in a whirlwind. What were they going to do with her? Why had they chosen her? She had to get answers, and soon. They reached a door at the back of the warehouse. The man in the suit knocked sharply on the door, and a voice called out from inside. "Enter." The man didn't wait for an invitation. He opened the door, motioning for Ava to step inside. Ava hesitated for a moment, but she knew there was no way out. She stepped inside, her eyes immediately locking onto the figure sitting at the desk. It was another man, older than the one who had brought her here. His face was hard, etched with years of experience, and his eyes gleamed with a cold, calculating intelligence. "Sit," he commanded. Ava's gaze flickered between him and the man in the suit. This wasn't a typical interrogation. This was something much more dangerous. "Who are you?" she demanded. "What do you want with me?" The older man didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him as if he were considering something. The silence stretched on, making Ava feel small and insignificant. Finally, he spoke. "I think you already know why you're here. You've been poking around where you shouldn't, and now you're a liability." Ava clenched her fists, frustration bubbling up inside her. "I haven't done anything wrong. You're the ones who are after me." The man's expression didn't change. "Is that what you think? This is bigger than you, bigger than all of us. You're just a piece of a much larger game." Ava's head was spinning. She couldn't make sense of it. What game? What were these people talking about? The man continued, his voice low and menacing. "You've crossed a line, Ava, and now you have a choice. You can either work with us, or you can keep resisting. But let me make one thing clear. You will never walk away from this. Not if you keep digging." Ava stared at him, her mind racing. This was it. This was her breaking point. She had to make a decision. Did she give in to them, or did she keep fighting? As the man's eyes bore into her, she knew the only answer was clear. She had to fight. The truth isn't always a sword you can wield. Ava's mind churned as she stared at the older man, trying to piece together the meaning of his words. The weight of the decision hung in the air, suffocating her. She could feel the tension tightening around her chest, the room closing in with every passing second. They wanted her to make a choice, but how could she? How could she possibly trust any of them when she didn't even know who they really were? The older man's eyes locked onto hers, his gaze piercing and unwavering. "You're in a position where defiance is no longer an option," he said, his tone soft yet ominous. "But I will give you a chance, Ava. Work with us, and you'll find the power you've been searching for. Continue fighting, and you'll disappear into the shadows, just another casualty." Ava swallowed hard, trying to keep her composure. Every part of her screamed to push back, to walk out of the door and take whatever risk she had to in order to escape their clutches. But she couldn't ignore the truth in his words either. She was caught in something far beyond her control. There was no easy out. The man in the suit, who had been standing silently beside the door, spoke up. "It's not just about you. It never was. This is bigger than you realize. You're a key, Ava. We just need you to unlock it." "Unlock what?" The question hovered in the air like a specter, mocking her. She had always thought of herself as a person who could control her destiny, who could forge her path despite the obstacles. But this was something different, something far more dangerous. "Unlock what?" Ava finally managed to say, her voice sharp, demanding answers. The older man leaned forward, his face hardening. "A secret, one that could change everything. You've been looking for answers, haven't you? Well, you're standing right on top of them." Ava recoiled slightly, the weight of his words settling heavily on her shoulders. "I don't care about your secrets," she retorted, trying to keep the quiver out of her voice. "I want to know why you've been chasing me, why you had me dragged here." The man's lips curved into something resembling a smile, but it was devoid of warmth. "Because you're the link we need. You've been involved in things that go far beyond your understanding. I'm offering you a chance to control the narrative, Ava. All you have to do is work with us." The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy with implication. Ava's pulse quickened as she tried to wrap her mind around everything that had happened since she'd first found herself tangled in this mess. The cryptic phone calls, the shadowy figures who had been watching her every move. And now this, the promise of power, of control. But what was it worth? Was any of it real? Her mind raced, but she couldn't ignore the stark reality of her situation. The people in this room were not amateurs. They weren't some rogue group of thugs. There was something far more calculated at play here, something much bigger than she could comprehend. If she walked away, she might never make it out alive. Why me? Ava demanded. What makes me so special? The older man sighed, almost as if he were disappointed by her question. You don't understand. It's not about your special qualities. It's about your proximity. You've been too close to the truth for too long. Too many people like you have disappeared. People who dug too deep, people who got too close to the answers. If you continue down this road, you'll be just another one of them. But if you work with us, he paused, letting the words sink in. You'll be someone who controls what happens next. The room seemed to close in on her. Ava's heart pounded in her chest, the overwhelming pressure building until she could hardly breathe. You don't understand, she muttered, more to herself than to them. I didn't ask for this. I didn't choose any of this. The older man nodded slowly, his expression unchanging. That's the way it always works. No one ever chooses this. But now that you're here, the choice is yours. Work with us, or resist. The consequences are yours to bear. Ava stood still for a moment, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts and doubts. She could feel the heat of the moment, the weight of his words pressing down on her. There was no turning back. This wasn't a choice she could make lightly. Finally, she took a deep breath, her voice low but clear. If I agree to work with you, I want to know everything. No more lies. No more games. The older man gave a sharp nod, his gaze unwavering. That's the deal, Ava. You'll have everything you need to make an informed decision. But remember, once you know the truth, there's no going back. The power you're looking for comes at a price. Are you willing to pay it? Ava hesitated, the weight of his question pressing down on her chest. Could she really handle the truth? Could she live with what she might uncover? She wasn't sure, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't live in the dark any longer. I'll do it, she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. But only on my terms. No more secrets. The older man's lips quirked into a smile, but it wasn't one of reassurance. It was the smile of someone who had just gained the upper hand. Very well. We'll begin immediately. Without another word, he motioned to the man in the suit, who immediately moved to open the door. Ava stepped forward, her heart racing, as she left the room behind and walked into the unknown. Her decision had been made. But at what cost? Every secret has a way of coming back to haunt you. The corridors of the building seemed endless, and every step Ava took echoed like a warning in the back of her mind. She had agreed to join them, but the air around her felt thicker, as if something unseen was pressing in, watching her every move. Her mind couldn't quiet the questions that swirled in her head. What had she just gotten herself into? She had wanted answers, but now that they were within her reach, she wasn't sure she was ready to hear them. The man in the suit led her down another hallway, his steps precise, calculated. He hadn't said a word since they left the room with the older man. Ava glanced over at him, trying to gauge his intentions, but his face remained unreadable, his expression locked in professional neutrality. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a door at the end of the hall. The man in the suit stopped in front of it, his hand resting on the knob. Without turning to her, he spoke in a low, measured tone. This is where the real work begins. Ava hesitated for a moment. She didn't know what was beyond this door, but she could feel the pull. Something important was waiting for her, something she could no longer avoid. The door creaked open, revealing a sterile, high-tech room filled with screens, monitors, and flashing lights. Several people were seated at desks, their eyes glued to the various data streaming across their screens. The buzz of technology hummed in the background, the room alive with activity. But it was the man standing at the center of the room who drew Ava's attention. He was tall, with a sharp jawline and dark, calculating eyes. There was something unsettling about him, something that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. This is Jonah, the man in the suit introduced, stepping aside to let Ava enter. He's our lead analyst. He's the one who can help you understand what's really going on. Jonah's eyes locked onto hers the moment she stepped into the room. For a brief moment, Ava thought she saw something flicker behind his gaze, something almost like recognition. But it was gone as quickly as it came. replaced by a professional, almost disinterested stare. "Come in," Jonah said, his voice smooth, but with an edge that made Ava uneasy. "We've been expecting you." She stepped forward cautiously, glancing around the room at the myriad of devices and gadgets that filled it. It looked like something straight out of a science fiction movie. But this was real. This was happening. Jonah motioned to a seat at one of the desks. "We've been tracking you for a while now, Ava. You've crossed some lines, dug into some things that you shouldn't have. But we'll help you connect the dots. We'll give you the answers you've been looking for." Ava took a seat, her stomach churning. She had no idea what they knew about her, or how deep they were involved in everything she had stumbled upon. But the idea of finally understanding the true nature of what was happening, the conspiracy she had unknowingly walked into, was too much to ignore. Jonah turned towards one of the monitors, tapping a few keys, and a series of files and images appeared on the screen. "These are the people who've been pulling the strings. Your life, as you know it, has been orchestrated by a select few, Ava. These are the names you need to know." Ava leaned forward, her heart pounding. The first image on the screen was a photo of a man she didn't recognize, a middle-aged individual with a hard expression. His name flashed beneath the image, Richard Corbin. Jonah continued, his voice low and deliberate. "Corbin is at the center of it all. He's the one who controls the money, the power, the resources. He's the one who decides who lives and who dies. Everything you've experienced up until now has been because of him." Ava's mind raced. "What does he want with me?" Jonah paused for a moment, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. "That's the question we've been trying to answer. You're not the only one he's been watching, but you're the one who got too close. There's something about you, something he didn't anticipate. It's why we're here. You're the key to unlocking everything." The room felt suddenly colder, and Ava's chest tightened. The idea that she was central to this massive, shadowy operation, that she had been a piece in a game she didn't understand, made her stomach twist. "What do you mean, the key?" she asked, trying to steady her voice. Jonah leaned in closer, his face shadowed by the glow of the monitor. "You've already uncovered something, Ava. Something that connects all of this. The events you've stumbled upon, they weren't random. They were orchestrated. And the reason you're still standing here, asking questions, is because you've been marked." Ava's eyes narrowed. "Marked?" He nodded. "Your family history, your connections, the choices you've made. It all ties back to something bigger. You're connected to Corbin, whether you know it or not. And now that you've started digging, you're on his radar. You can't just walk away from this anymore. But that doesn't mean you can't control your destiny." Ava's mind spun with what Jonah had just told her. She had always felt like there was something more, something just beyond her grasp, but she hadn't been prepared for this. This wasn't just a random conspiracy. This was a coordinated, global effort that was somehow tied to her. Her family, her past, everything she thought she knew. Jonah turned to face her fully now, his eyes cold and calculating. "The information we've uncovered is only part of the story. You're going to have to decide, Ava. Do you want to be a player in this game, or do you want to continue being its pawn?" Ava stared back at him, her thoughts racing. There was no turning back now. The truth was within her reach, but it came at a cost. One she wasn't sure she was ready to pay. "Is there even a way out of this?" she asked, her voice quieter now, more uncertain than before. Jonah didn't answer right away. He simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Finally, after a long silence, he spoke. "There's always a way out, but not everyone makes it." Ava's heart skipped a beat, the weight of his words sinking in. She had entered this world of secrets and lies without fully understanding the consequences, and now she had to face the truth. But what if the truth was more than she could handle? The line between truth and lies becomes a blur when survival is at stake. Ava sat frozen in her chair, staring at the screen before her. Jonah's words still echoed in her ears, a grim warning that reverberated through her chest. She had known that digging into her father's past would eventually catch someone's attention, but she never imagined it would lead her here. She had crossed a threshold she couldn't undo, and now, the deeper truth was pulling her into an abyss she wasn't sure she could escape from. Jonah's cold gaze fixed on her, as though he was waiting for her to react, to make a decision. The room around her seemed to close in, the hum of the machinery and the low chatter from the analysts in the background now fading into a dull buzz. All she could hear was the beating of her own heart, faster and faster with every passing second. "Why me?" she finally managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you bring me here?" Jonah didn't immediately answer. Instead, he walked over to the large window overlooking the city, his back turned to her. Ava could barely make out his expression, but the tension in his posture was enough to tell her he was preparing for something important. "Because you're connected to this in ways you don't yet understand," Jonah replied, his tone clipped. "And you can help us, whether you want to or not. The choice isn't really yours." Ava felt a chill run down her spine. She had no idea what he meant, but something about his words triggered a deep sense of unease. She was starting to realize that her involvement in this wasn't a mere accident, it was planned. And her family's history was more entwined with the forces at play here than she had ever known. Her mind raced through the pieces of the puzzle. Her father, the cryptic messages from his old colleagues, the threats she had received. Everything pointed back to Corbin. He wasn't just some faceless villain. He was the architect of everything, and she was part of his design. But what was her role in this twisted game? Jonah finally turned around, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "Corbin's plan is bigger than you think. He's using people, manipulating them to serve his ends. And you've seen how far he's willing to go to protect his secrets. He's not just after power. He wants something far more dangerous. Something that could change the world as we know it." Ava swallowed hard. "What does he want from me? What do I have that he doesn't already control?" Jonah moved closer, his footsteps light but purposeful. He stopped beside her, his presence overwhelming. "It's not about what you have. It's about what you represent. You're the key to unlocking something that has been buried for years. Your father's involvement, the decisions he made, they all led to this moment. And you, Ava, are the only one who can access the answers that Corbin is hiding." Ava's head spun. She had always admired her father, but now she was beginning to see him through a different lens, one that distorted everything she thought she knew about him. Was he a hero or a pawn? Had he been trying to protect her, or had he unknowingly set her on this path? She clenched her fists, trying to steady her breathing. "So, what now? Do I just roll over and let you all use me like some sort of pawn in a game I can't even see?" Jonah's eyes softened for a brief moment, but only for a second. "If it were that simple, we wouldn't be here. But you're in this now, Ava. There's no going back. The question is, how do you want to play this?" Ava sat back, her mind racing through the implications of Jonah's words. Her heart was torn between fear and determination. She didn't trust Jonah, not completely, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of sincerity, that suggested he wasn't entirely on Corbin's side. Or perhaps he was playing a game of his own. Her thoughts turned to her father once more. What had he known? What had he kept from her? And if Jonah was right, if Corbin's web of influence stretched far beyond what she had imagined, then what could she do to stop it? The weight of it all pressed down on her shoulders. The decision wasn't as simple as just walking away. She had to make a choice, and the consequences would be far-reaching. Jonah moved toward the far side of the room, typing rapidly into another computer terminal. The screens flickered, and more images and documents filled the display. "This," he said, pointing to the screen, "is what Corbin is after. It's an artifact, a key to a technology that could change everything. And it's in your father's possession." Ava's stomach lurched. What kind of technology? Jonah didn't answer immediately. He glanced at the screen, his expression serious. "Think of it as the ultimate power, something that could alter history, rewrite the future. And your father, he was the only one who knew how to unlock it." Ava's mind reeled as the full scope of the situation began to unfold before her. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was terrifying. If Jonah was right, her father hadn't just been a part of a covert operation. He had been guarding something that could reshape the entire world. And now, it seemed that it was up to Ava to finish what he had started. "Are you ready to find out the truth?" Jonah asked, his voice low, almost a challenge. Ava stared at the screen, at the images of the artifact and the blueprints of a technology that seemed too dangerous to exist. But there was no turning back now. "Tell me what I need to do," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. "I'm in." Jonah gave a slight nod. "Good. Then let's begin." The final choice is never clear, but it's always the one that defines you. The air in the room seemed to thicken as Ava stood up, determination settling over her like a heavy cloak. She didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time, she felt a flicker of power within her. Jonah had laid it all out, shown her the fragile thread that connected her father to Corbin's dangerous web. And now, the choices she made would either destroy them all or change everything. Jonah's hands hovered over the control panel, inputting commands with swift precision. Ava watched, her mind still processing the gravity of her decision. She could feel the pull of the unknown, of this path she was about to walk down, and she knew there was no turning back. Her father had protected her from the truth, and for years, she had lived in a bubble of safety, oblivious to the forces circling around her. Now, the truth was out, and whether she wanted to admit it or not, she had inherited a dangerous legacy. The thought made her stomach churn, but she couldn't turn away. Not when everything she had loved was hanging in the balance. "Your father wasn't just a protector, Ava." Jonah's voice broke through her thoughts, low and serious. "He was a gatekeeper. And this," he gestured to the screen in front of them, "is the key." The image on the screen flickered as he zoomed in on a close-up of a strange, intricate device. It was a small, metallic object, its surface etched with symbols and codes that Ava didn't recognize. The object appeared ancient, yet its sleek design suggested something much more advanced than anything from her father's time. "Is this what he was hiding?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Jonah nodded, his eyes locked on the screen. "Yes, this is the artifact Corbin has been hunting for. But your father knew it had the potential to destroy everything if it fell into the wrong hands." Ava absorbed his words, her mind racing. Her father had been protecting this device all along. But why? And why hadn't he told her about it? "I don't understand," she said quietly, a knot forming in her throat. "If it's so dangerous, why didn't he destroy it? Why keep it hidden?" Jonah's gaze softened as he looked at her. He knew that one day, the world would need it. "The truth is, Ava, the technology contained within that artifact could either save or condemn humanity. Your father didn't just hide it, he safeguarded it. And now, it's up to you to decide what happens next." Ava stepped closer to the screen, her fingers lightly brushing the edge of the table as if she could physically touch the device. The weight of Jonah's words hit her like a wave. The burden was real. She wasn't just playing a part in some shadowy conflict. She was holding the fate of the world in her hands. "But I don't know what it does," Ava murmured. "How can I make a decision about something so powerful when I don't even understand it?" Jonah hesitated for a moment, then placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't need to understand it all, Ava. You just need to trust that the right choice will make itself clear when the time comes." Ava met his eyes, searching for any sign of doubt, any hint that he didn't believe in her. But all she saw was resolve. Jonah believed in her, and for reasons she couldn't explain, she found herself trusting him. "You're asking me to make a choice that could change the world," she said slowly, her voice gaining strength. "How do I even know what the right choice is?"